open session. Okay, good afternoon members and welcome to this afternoon's sitting of the Education Committee. So cover the housekeeping first. I would advise members that the committee meeting will be recorded and broadcast throughout Parliament buildings and online, and I would advise those in the public gallery that they're welcome to use mobile devices as long as they're in airplane mode and that all devices are muted. And I would remind that everyone it's not permitted to take photographs or record any part of the meeting. So item 1 on the agenda is apologies. I don't have any apologies at this stage. Sorry, apology from Kathy came in late, so apology from Kathy Mason. And then we have Julie and I think John, although may not be with us yet, joining remotely. Any issues with...
Apology from John.
Oh, okay. I think that's been corrected.
He did said he would join remotely.
I said he's going to join remotely. Yeah. So again, any issues with connection or audio for any remote attendees, just link in through the clerk and the team if there are any issues. So item 2 on the agenda is chairperson's business, and it's just a reference to news that was filtering through yesterday, mainly through social media channels, really, which is that the NITC has advised it is now in formal dispute with the department over workload. So that is a fairly significant development in the education system. I think we have felt that was potentially brewing for quite some time, and there did seem to be a sense that the Minister's response in terms of producing an action plan arising from the independent review of workload hadn't landed particularly well with unions in terms of I think the required sort of measurability and time scales and budget allocated to that. So we have now moved into that more formal procedure. So happy to open up if any members have anything to add, but I would want to suggest I think we should be writing to the Minister today as a committee to ask for an urgent update on now what the process is in terms of managing that formal dispute and the timeline in terms of engagement with the trade unions, because we really, I think, would all, whatever perspective we're coming from in terms of the wider issues in the system, I think would want to avoid industrial action impacting our schools at the moment. So I think getting a fairly urgent steer from the Minister on that in terms of how he plans to respond. I would also suggest we may well hear from the NITC directly. They may write to us, but I would suggest we should also send some correspondence to the NITC if they're able to set out what their concerns are at the moment and any particular demands or any particular red lines that they have at the moment that they feel need to be addressed if we're going to avoid formal industrial action. And I did just want to highlight, I think, we have seen the announcement from the Minister around quite substantial spend on AI investment as a workload intervention is how it's being pitched. I would like to hear, and I think we are in the region of somewhere between 10 and 11 million. It's a really substantial investment, and a lot of the workload review has been couched in terms of there is a price tag attached. So I would be keen to hear from the NITC if they do feel that is a helpful intervention, or if that 10 to 11 million could potentially be better spent on other actions arising from that review. So those are my proposals. I don't think we should downplay the significance of this. I know that announcements are made as bargaining chips and all of this, but I think it is clear the mood among teachers is that there is need for substantial movement from the department here, and I think it's in everybody's interest who has any interest in education in Northern Ireland that we can hopefully move to a solution. Any other views from other members at this stage on that issue? No, not at this stage. Okay, so we will see what comes through on that. Item 3 on the agenda is declarations of interest. Do any members have any declarations they need to make in relation to any item today? No. I'll just make one declaration with the Children's Law Centre and their briefing note provided referenced their letter to the department around the SEN reform agenda, and just to note that my wife works for an organisation who is a signatory to that letter. Any issues arise, members can raise those as the meeting progresses. Item 4 on the agenda is matters arising. Anything at all on this from anyone? So I've got Michelle and then Danny.
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, I just wanted to raise one that has come to my attention sort of last week, but more acutely today. I met with the Northern Ireland Childminders Association. Last week, the Health Minister announced changes to the minimum standards for childminders, including ratios. It seems that there's a complete disconnect in terms of the impact of the changes they announced with the real world in terms of childminders, parents, children. It's very concerning, so I think that we need to write to the Health Minister, and I would like you to ask the following. I'm going to be really precise on that. I want to know, was there an impact assessment carried out on how childminders would be impacted by these changes and the childcare sector more generally? Does the department have modelling on how many childminders will be impacted and how many children will be impacted? And if they don't have modelling, then how did they make this decision? I'd like to understand the research and analysis around the changes made. So, for example, what safeguarding or child development research did they draw on? And what engagement the Health Minister had with the Education Minister around these changes and how it impacts on the early learning and childcare strategy. It's important to get the answers to those questions. I also think it would be very worth hearing urgently from NICMA on this, because this could have really serious impact in terms of the sustainability of the childminding sector and an impact on parents as well. So if members were happy with that, I think it would be really worthwhile.
Thank you, Michelle. And some of these issues may come up in the briefing today, but I think, again, given that particular health angle, I'm very happy to endorse that. And if members are content, I would suggest maybe seeking urgent written briefing from NICMA in the first instance, but I think it may well require bringing them to committee to give evidence. But again, we have a very tight agenda between now and recess, so I think in the interest of making sure we hear their position, I would suggest seeking that in writing, but may well require an oral briefing unless members have an alternative view, or if anyone has anything else to add to that. No, so thanks for that, Michelle. I think there's agreement in terms of taking that action forward. Danny, you'd indicated for this area.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Look, I just really want to place on record sort of my disappointment on reflection of last week's committee from evidence from the department. To describe efforts to feed 90,000 children as potentially damaging to the education system, it's contrary to the evidence, but I thought it was a deeply political statement to be making within their briefing paper. They gave a series of opinions last week without any real legal, they say they'll come back with that, or any real insight into what amendments they would like to see come forward. And I would like us to get commitment from them that they are going to bring forward those proposed amendments that will strengthen the bill. But I really am disappointed that they did say that. And I met this morning with over 20 groups, key stakeholders in anti-poverty strategy and all different campaigns, and they have been watching really carefully what's being said, and there is a growing disappointment at even how this committee stage has started. And it is fair to say, not it's just the proposal of the bill, it feels like we're stuck on the principles of the bill, and people are just throwing out these ideas of how I would like to spend money. I think it comes across really poorly, and it was pointed out to me that someone brought it up around how can you guarantee that a child's going to get nutritional value out of a meal. Like a box of strawberries can cost over £3. This is what we're talking about here. This isn't like loads and loads of money. It is only one part of a wider puzzle, and it's almost like the questioning is shaming parents, and it's a wrong approach I think to be taken, but it's a wrong image to be coming out of the committee, and it isn't helped when senior officials come in and actually say that. So I'm really disappointed they did it, and going forward I said I'll work with everybody. I want the department and everyone to be more constructive when we're talking about the bill, because it is very sensitive as well. We're talking about poverty here.
Well, thank you, Danny, and certainly those comments are noted on the record. I wanted just to pick up on a practical level. Have we got clarity from the department? They have raised issues around drafting and things they feel that need to be amended. Have they provided us with an undertaking that they're going to provide those to the committee, or are they leaving that to a later stage? Have we had clarity from them?
So they've been asked in correspondence to address some of the technical aspects that they raised in their briefing, and also where they itemised things that wouldn't work. They've been asked to propose amendment that would address those.
So that is in progress.
So that's in process,
okay.
yeah.
So it's just good to get the clarity on that. Okay, anything to add at this stage, David?
I would just say, Chair, my perception of the presentation last week is probably unsurprisingly slightly different to Danny's in that regard, and it's against the financial context and the pressures that the education department faces in terms of their own funding. So the outlay on Danny's proposals will necessarily, as he's acknowledged himself, have to be taken from other parts of the system, and it's that will be damaging to the system. The debate really here that I can see is not around whether we should support children and families to ensure that children are fed before school, but rather whether this is an intervention that should be undertaken by the Education Department. And I mean, if Danny's colleagues, ministerial colleagues, wished to, they could be saying we're going to take a certain amount of money here and we're going to give it to communities, or we're going to put it wherever in health, and ensure that there's a welfare intervention on that basis. But that's, you know, and I think that would have been a better way of doing things. I recognise, as I have last week, Danny's being genuine in the reasons that he's bringing forward, but I don't feel that it's the right method in order to achieve the aim that he's setting forward. I think the department last week were merely saying that financially this will damage the department and therefore the education system, and it's not perhaps the best mechanism in order to achieve the aim that's being set out.
Could I just come in
Yes,
there,
Deputy Chair.
because a lot of that came up while I was questioning the official, and they started off by saying that this bill would be harmful to the provision of education here. He then accepted later on during the course of the questioning that it could actually be beneficial to the provision of education if children are being properly fed during holidays. So perhaps there should have been more thought given to the term harmful, or that the sentence anyway, that it could be harmful to the provision of education. So the position that David has taken up, I think, is controversial, to say the least. I mean, every member is entitled to bring forward a bill if they want to. This is an important issue. This is about poverty. This is about, you know, one of the major issues that has been agreed on within the executive, that we should deal with poverty, and particularly child poverty. So, you know, but certainly the way that the official came in to deal with the issue, I think, was wrong, and the official in question should reflect on that.
So all that should be noted. I think it would just emphasise that it was very clear, I think, when this bill arrived, that second stage there were differing views on the principles of the bill as a starter, and I have no doubt when we reach final stage those arguments will be rehearsed, but I think it is important the committee keeps a focus on dealing with the bill as it now stands in front of us. Okay, that takes us to item 5 in the agenda, which is the draft minutes. So I would refer members to the revised draft minutes of the Education Committee meeting of the 6th of May, and that's at page 4 of your tabled papers. Can I get agreement that the minutes are a complete and accurate record of proceedings? Is that agreed?
Right.
Okay. Okay, item 6 on the agenda then, it is an oral briefing from the Children's Law Centre, if we can bring the witnesses through, and it is a briefing on the SL1 Special Educational Needs SEN regulations. So while the witnesses are just coming through, I would refer members to a briefing note from the committee clerk at page 18, submission from the Law Centre on the regulations at page 19, the SL1 itself at page 35, the draft SR at page 47, the clerk's briefing note on submissions received in response to the Citizen Space Survey, and that's at page 14 of tabled papers. And we just draw members' attention. We'll possibly have a separate conversation around those to ensure that we're responding to those appropriately, and a copy of all those responses at page 21 of your tabled papers. So a lot of material for members to have digested in relation to this briefing, and I think that may well come up in the evidence session in terms of just the volume of material that we are dealing with for this SL1. So I would like to welcome John O'Doherty, Chief Executive of the Children's Law Centre, to committee today, Catherine Stevenson, Solicitor and Head of Legal Services at the Children's Law Centre, and Rachel Hogan, the SEND Specialist Legal Advisor, also from the Children's Law Centre. So you're all very welcome to committee today, and we do have a lot of material to get through, so I think probably no need for any preamble. Best to hand over to yourselves for any opening remarks you want to make. If I could ask for that to be up to 10 minutes, and then we'll move into question and answer. And I think we're all conscious that this is a very technical piece of legislation or set of regulations that we're looking at that is interconnected to lots of other pieces of legislation and then practical outworkings in a code of practice. So we really do appreciate you bringing your expertise in terms of the SEND system to committee today. So over to yourselves.
Thank you so much, Chair, and thank you for the opportunity to provide evidence to the committee on the proposed special educational needs regulations. The Children's Law Centre, for over 20 years as an independent charity, has represented children and families in Northern Ireland and advocated for meaningful reform to the SEN system. We have consistently highlighted the need for a system that works effectively for children and young people, and we remain firmly committed to supporting reform that delivers improved outcomes. We recognise the need for change. The challenges within the current system have been well rehearsed by the Children's Law Centre and others over many years and have been the subject of a number of critical reports, as you will know. Reform must now be delivered in a way that is genuinely child-centred, focused on timely identification of need, early and effective intervention, cooperation across children's services, and sufficient investment to meet children's educational needs in practice. The Children's Law Centre has engaged constructively throughout this process in numerous review processes. We have worked alongside the Department of Education and the Education Authority, providing advice and contributing to the development of the SEND Northern Ireland Act 2016, as well as the revised SEND regulations and revised Code of Practice. We provided comprehensive input, legal analysis and detailed feedback throughout every consultation. We have actively participated in relevant reference groups and advisory groups. Despite repeated assertions to the contrary, we have made ourselves available to all agencies who sought our engagement. We make no apologies for the robustness of our interventions and will use every avenue available to us to ensure that the reform process delivered what has been promised to children with special educational needs and disabilities, and that decisions related to the education of children with SEND are rooted in producing positive outcomes. We welcome aspects of the proposed reforms which reflect long-standing positions advocated by the Children's Law Centre. There are, however, other areas of significant concern which have started to emerge during the current long-delayed scrutiny process, which my colleague Rachel will outline in more detail shortly. In particular, we are concerned about the limited time available for scrutiny of the revised SEND regulations and Code of Practice, their potential outworkings and practical application by schools, the EA and tribunals. The Children's Law Centre's concerns are shared by many stakeholders who work directly with children and families. We set out these concerns in our recent correspondence to the committee and in our public letter in April. The regulations and accompanying Code of Practice are complex, voluminous and highly interdependent and require careful consideration not only in terms of their volume, accessibility, wording and the service access thresholds they govern, but in how they will operate in practice and whether they serve the best interests of children or are weighted towards serving the needs of the system itself. Our team has approached this process by drawing on extensive legal casework, observing developments since new systems have started to embed, and testing the proposals against real-life scenarios to assess whether or not they will deliver better outcomes for children and families. Through this work, we have identified a number of areas where key concerns raised during previous consultations and ongoing engagement do not appear to have been fully addressed. When we take our concerns together across the regulations, the code and significant EA transformation programmes in a context where collaboration and transparency has deteriorated, there is significant danger that the mistakes of the past will be repeated, entrenched and magnified, and that the vision of the department that every child should receive the right support from the right people at the right time and in the right place will not be realised. Importantly, the concerns we raised are not unique to the Children's Law Centre. They are shared across the community voluntary sector by school leaders, teaching unions and other stakeholders. There are also a number of areas of overlap between our analysis and the Assembly Research and Information Service briefing, which identifies areas for further scrutiny. At this critical stage, it is essential the Education Committee is able to satisfy itself that what is proposed by the Department will result in the intended outcomes for children. We reiterate our support for reform that complies with the legal rights of children with special educational needs and disabilities. However, for reform to succeed, it must be properly sequenced, adequately resourced and grounded in the realities of the current system and existing pressures. In that context, while the Department has provided some detail regarding spending to date on school capacity building, there remains a lack of clarity on key issues such as how learning support coordinator time will be funded on a sustainable basis going forward. This is of particular concern given recent speculation regarding potential reductions in funding for this critical non-teaching time, which is fundamental to the effective operation of SEND processes at school level. Above all, reform must deliver meaningful, measurable improvements and outcomes for children and young people with special educational needs. I will now pass on to Rachel, who will take you through some of the specific areas of concern for the Children's Law Centre.
Thank you, John, and thank you to the committee. The time we've been permitted at this particular stage of the committee's scrutiny has allowed us to take a high-level approach. As you say, there's a huge volume of interconnected information to be considered, so we have to caveat what we say today in the sense that we can't possibly have scrutinised everything to the level that we would require. It's extremely important for the committee at this stage and its role at this very important stage to receive the assurance that you require to make sure that you're happy for this process to proceed. And it's a great weight of responsibility upon us in supporting the committee and giving our expertise and trying to give you the best advice that we can. And it's a great responsibility upon you to be expected, I think, to scrutinise this volume and complexity of material in a very short period of time, although it's taken a very long time to get us to this stage. Schools have already been trained on the operation of aspects of the revised SEND framework in advance of the SL1 ever coming towards the committee. So before scrutiny has taken place, there's been extensive training of SENDCOs and others from the EA's SEND implementation team, and that's essentially based on the draft code that we have before us alongside the revised regulations. That is potentially procedurally irregular in that a system is being implemented before it has gone through the scrutiny process. When the Assembly enacted the SEND Act in 2016, it sort of did so in good faith that the regulations and the code would follow soon after that provide the detail of the system, but unfortunately due to circumstances often beyond the Department's control, such as suspensions of the Assembly and so on, we just seem to have been scuppered at every turn. Every time this tries to come forward, there's been a bit of a blockage. So a very significant amount of time has passed since we last saw this material, which obviously makes it very difficult to recollect all of the intricate detail and to see what changes have been made in both the regulations and the code of practice. We don't have colour-coded versions, we can't see what the amendments are, so we're having to open 4 computer screens and have various versions in front of us line by line. And as a small charity, we have diverted significant staff and resources towards looking at the regulations, the code, the enhanced support framework that the EA is proposing, and again against the SEND Act, looking back at Assembly scrutiny processes during the SEND Act and what the intention of the Assembly was. And we've concluded with a great deal of worry that perhaps the intentions that the Assembly had are not going to be fulfilled in the current format. So the revised framework, including the impacts of implementation, may require to be scrutinised in fuller detail over a reasonable time period, and it might need to be withdrawn and reformulated as one option, or at least paused for a time so that everybody has time to scrutinise it properly. I have no doubt at all that the departmental officials that are dealing with this are equally under a lot of pressure in terms of the time and the size of team they have available and all of the questions that we have to ask of them. There's no real analysis within the SL1 letter and the memorandum that goes with it about whether the proposed revised regulations and the closely associated code are proportionate and transparent, or whether they reduce or increase the administrative and bureaucratic burden faced by children, families and education providers, which SEND reform was supposed to address. And we would like to see an analysis along that line. It certainly appears to be very process heavy. The majority of the activity to date in transformation has gone towards process and really hasn't focused on outcomes for children, and we don't see evidence of measurement of that or focus on that at this particular time. It's unclear from the published documentation which part of the revised regulations and code have been amended, deleted or added post-consultation. As I've said, changing one word in a regulation can completely change the effect on statutory assessments and statements and so on, and that's why we say it's so important that we fully understand that. It's a feature of this particular framework that substantive provisions such as the 3-stage of intervention in the code, formerly the 5 stages of the code of practice, are delegated into the code rather than being part of the primary legislation. And due to this high level of codependence, the two were consulted upon together by the department back in 2021, and prior to that we had consultations in 2016. So they're interdependent, but they're also inextricably linked with a wide range of other legal and legislative pieces of legislation, such as the Education Northern Ireland Order 1996, which is the primary legislation, the Special Educational Needs and Disability Northern Ireland Order, the regulations, the Code, the Children's Services Cooperation Act, the SEND Act, the recent DE policy statement and 5-year plan, the Graduated Response Framework and the proposed enhanced support model. It's impossible to unlink these. They are all interwoven, and I am sure in your own scrutiny you have appreciated how overwhelming it is to try and analyse the actual impact that these regulations may have if they're not in top form and they don't have all of the matters in them that should be addressed. We had responded to the previous version, the previous targeted consultation, and we'd set out a number of concerns that we had. And we need to really have time to analyse, have those been addressed. We know that the department has tried to address some of the concerns that we raised, and we thank them for that. But we can see that there are certain matters of grave importance that have not been addressed to our satisfaction, and we fear that we'll be left with a system that is weaker than the one we started with, which is exactly the opposite of what we have intended in this reform process, which was largely driven by Children's Law Centre and other organisations. The issues that we've raised, I'll just summarise, they're all written in the paper, which we can share publicly at some stage as well once we have it here with the committee. Largely they centre around the content and the format of statements of special educational needs, what goes where in the statement and how enforceable it is, who provides advice to that statement to inform it. We have some concerns about the upper time limit on the length of time it can take for a statement to be produced, which is now 34 weeks. Given that the purpose of all of this was to shorten the time frame for statements from 26 weeks to 20, and we've now ended up with 22. Some concerns around the experience required of learning support coordinators and the time that they'll have and the funding for that time. And the shift to schools of a lot of responsibility, perhaps disproportionately. I mean, we want schools to do their part, and that's part of this work, is to upskill them, to build their capacity. But we feel there may have been a disproportionate shift to schools to the point where there may be an unlawful de facto delegation of duties that belong to the EA and responsibilities falling into the hands of schools in terms of determining support packages and making arrangements and so on and deciding what should be provided. Really that sits with the Education Authority at statement level. The Minister has provided us with some written assurance in relation to the fact that the law will be complied with in these processes, and we thank him for that assurance. However, we can't see the basis of that, and we're not satisfied based on the information we currently have available. We don't feel fully assured by that. And we feel that the committee should seek that assurance, and it should be vigorous in doing so, and that the committee would feel absolutely confident in whatever recommendation it makes to the Assembly in relation to affirming these regulations or not. And then obviously the Assembly would have the ultimate decision in that regard. Briefly on the revised Code of Practice, we've had an 8-week consultation. On the revised Code of Practice, the code itself is 400 pages long. It's very difficult to navigate. I actually have to admit I had to use AI, much against my better judgment, to find chapters in the revised code because I couldn't find anything in it for the purposes of scrutinising it. It's too long, it's too bureaucratic, it's very, very directive. It's more than giving instruction and support, it's extremely directive, very unwieldy. It's not fit for purpose in our view and is not fit for issue. And that creates a real difficulty because the code and the regulations are tied very closely together. Now, we haven't created this difficulty. It's the effluxion of time and the extensive delay has left us in this difficulty. But we would be very keen that that code is not placed into operation and that it is redrafted and made to be fit for purpose. And that then feeds back into, are the regulations ready to go out if the code isn't ready? And I think what we really need here is more time to get this right rather than issuing something just because we're in a hurry now after all of this work that we've put in for years. So it's too complex, it's too bureaucratic. And we're having difficulty assessing its impact at the moment. We need more time to do that. The other thing I just want to say is that the code cannot be used to try and move children out of a definition set by primary legislation, nor can it be used to disguise special educational provision as ordinary provision to try and hold children back from the SEN register at stage 1 of the Code of Practice. Formerly, or at the moment, under the operative Code of Practice, children should be placed on the SEN register once a school starts to differentiate provision for them. Under this scheme here, they wouldn't even be identified as having a special educational need at that stage, and they'd have to jump through quite a lot of school-based hoops before even being registered. So it's the length of the pipeline and the thresholds that are within that pipeline that need to be studied in relation to the code and the regulations. And then looking back again at the 1996 order, the primary legislation. And those thresholds are effectively Article 3 of the 1996 order, which is the definition of special educational needs and special educational provision. If you narrow that in some way or reverse engineer through the code, then it's going against the intention of that primary legislation. Article 15, which is statutory assessment, and Article 16, which is specification on statements. So how we get provision into the hands of children that's helping them directly. So those thresholds all need more scrutiny. We would certainly like to spend more time checking. And we're not saying that everything's wrong and nothing could be put right. What we're saying is we don't know, we can't be assured. It may be that the vast majority of it is perfectly okay, but we are just not in a position to say that at this time. And there are certainly some important matters that we are not happy with at the moment and couldn't recommend affirmation on that basis at this stage. We also wonder in terms of commencement, and we understand there's to be phased commencement of various parts of this, but in terms of the regulations and the code, we understand that they're to start on the 1st of September. And parts of the enhanced support model would be due to start in September alongside new statutory assessment and statement and guidance, which we don't have sight of, and issues around specification on statements. If that commences on the 1st of September, and we have teaching unions, all teaching unions telling us that they feel overwhelmed and they don't feel content with the direction of travel, then I think we really do have a difficulty in that. Is our unstable system ready to cope with change? Is there anything we can do to help bring this through in a more measured way? Certainly if we get it right to start with, that will help. If we're making mistakes at the outset, we won't be able to fix this. This is our last chance to get this right. And we cannot turn away from the children and young people that we've been sent here to serve. We have to get this right. We owe that to the children and young people who have been waiting so long, and their families and their teachers and classroom assistants and so on. We need to think about the financial and human resources that are available to support this system in terms of multidisciplinary input as well. We need to be talking about health and education working together and how the health workforce can service the education needs of children through statements and for those children without statements. There will be a lot of focus on statements and the issues that we raise, but I want to make it very clear that we feel that earlier intervention pre-statement is the desired goal, that children have access to support, a wide range of multidisciplinary support at all stages, regardless of where they are in the code of practice. And that's something we've always said, and we maintain that now. So reflecting on everything there, I suppose the problems that we had at the beginning when all of this began, 20 years ago pretty much, are the problems that we still have today. That's blockages in the pipeline, statements that aren't specific, people having to wait a long time, frustration in trying to get communication that is adequate, proper best interest decision making where everybody's involved and has a stake in it. And I think we all need to work together closely and collaboratively between the department, the Education Authority, the committee, the Children's Law Centre, the unions, everyone who's an interest. If we are not pulling in the same direction, this is going to fail. And we do not want to see ourselves. So we want it to be successful, and therefore we're very willing to collaborate, as always, as we always have been, with whoever would like to work with us.
Thank you for the initial presentation there. And look, and I think you set out very, very clearly the complexity of what we're dealing with and the significance of what we're dealing with. And I have been very conscious of that, even trying to prepare for today's session, that we will ultimately be faced with a binary question in committee. Do we approve or do we not? We can't amend this. We don't have a future amending stage. Well, if we don't get it quite right at committee stage, we can sort that out at another point. This is yes or no. And I think that does create a degree of pressure in committee in terms of making sure that we do this work properly at this stage. And I'm also conscious on the other side, we have the department sort of saying you're going to entirely stymie SEND reform if you delay this. So there is that sense of pressure in the mix with it. And I don't think that's a good context to be making decisions in. And if that's really that, if I've come to any conclusions trying to prepare for today, it is that this is not the context in which we should be doing scrutiny. And I think in terms of what we're looking at, and how you've set things out, this to me feels as complex as any piece of primary legislation. You know, we have 2 PMBs before the committee, which are, I think, 2 clauses and 4 clauses, and we're talking about, you know, committee stages lasting into the months for one of those bills at least, and for other bills that committees are scrutinising, that is the norm, and no one no one debates that in the Assembly, though you should take less time with that. Scrutiny is a bad thing, but I'm just concerned because this is regulations. It's fine. We can nod it through. So I share a lot of those concerns. So I suppose to maybe pin down maybe a view on this, if what we're saying at the minute doesn't feel like a good context to be doing scrutiny, could you give your assessment in terms of what a good and effective and appropriate scrutiny process for regulations of this complexity would look like?
I think firstly it involves having sufficient time for everyone to read all of the regulations and look at what the changes are in those regulations, then look at how the code is operationalising that, and then being able to link that back to the primary legislation, which is also subject to implementation under this framework, which is the SEND Act, which is bringing in new provisions, brand new provisions, most of which are uncontroversial in many ways, but also the original primary legislation, which holds all of the rights to assessment and statementing. There needs to be time to look at all of that in the cold light of day. We need to look at it together with the department. They know what the changes are. We don't. We're getting there. We're trying to figure it out. Every time you compare a page or two, you find some wee thing that's been changed, and we don't know why it's been changed. There might be a very good reason, or there might be a reason that we're not happy with. So you need sufficient time to do it, and you need to have, I suppose, you need to feel confident that you understand what is changing, and also then what difference that change is going to make. So is it going to make a positive difference, or is it possibly going to cause a difficulty? On a sort of very high level, my feeling is that there are a number of important issues that I would like to see the department coming to the table to speak about, particularly the format of statements and who provides statutory advices and who can make recommendations under a statement. Those are items that I see as red lines, and that the department has said very clearly that they have taken legal advice and they're absolutely not minded to move on at all. That needs to be really taken apart. There's certain things we need to dig into. There's a lot of stuff we can just assure ourselves, put to one side. We're not in a position today to say to you, we don't need to look at this or that. We'd like to be in a position to say, look, we don't need to worry about, we're not worried about 90% of this. We are worried about 10%, and it's the 10% that's crunch time. So it's making sure we have enough time to actually look at that clause by clause in terms of the ones that are causing concern, and for the department to explain to us the rationale behind what they've done.
Could I ask even just to be more specific then? I mean, the department want this to be in place 1st of September as far as we can understand. To my mind, that would need to be in the next 2 to 3 weeks. We would probably need to be signing this off to get this then through the next stages of the process to be ready to go for schools.
Yeah, and the difficulty is,
does that feel feasible to you? A few weeks?
It does not feel at all feasible. I mean, we have been up, not to complain, everybody has to do a job of work, but our team has been working until 1 and 2 o'clock in the morning on this for 2 weeks, and we haven't touched the sides of it.
If I could come in just in terms of the code, I've been looking quite comprehensively at the code and trying to decipher what's in it and what's changed in it, and look at the actual practical application of that for schools and what operationally it will mean for them. I mean, there's some very significant changes in the regulations in terms of duties and responsibilities, but what does that mean on the ground from an operational level? But I think the broader thing as well that we need to consider is the EA operational measures and reform measures that have been put in place over the last number of years. So we know we have, obviously there's been a very significant change in the complexity of need and the profile of children within mainstream. We know there's been a huge increase in SPIMS classes. We know there has been obviously the commencement of the local impact teams from September last year. We've been looking at that and trying to analyse and evaluate and review as we go with our advice team what's happening with those, where are the delays, where are the pitfalls, where are the stops in children accessing services. So I think when we're looking at the code and the regulations, these were drafted, the first version of them was drafted in 2021. And now 2021 they were consulted on. Now we're looking at a very different environmental context and the operational, what has come through in terms of the implications of the graduated response framework as well, and looking forward at the enhanced support model. None of those things are in my mind, adequately referenced in the code. and the implications for schools in trying to manoeuvre and work between all of those different measures, and so I think that's very much lost here.
Can I ask just on the follow up on that, just really because I'm really conscious other members will want to come in and with times against us today. The code has been in my mind thinking about this session in terms of how we approach it, because we could ultimately, I mean, maybe to get your clarity on this, could we reach a scenario where the committee satisfies itself that the regs are okay, but then the code remains a lottery because the department, it's not part of this SL1, it's a separate document. And is there a risk that we could agree regs and then the code could end up being something that we're not content with?
I don't think that is feasible, because that's exactly what happened with the SEND Act. The committee and the Assembly approved the SEND Act and enacted it based on assurances that the regs and the code were coming, and 10 years later we then get this situation. So the regs and the code cannot be separated. I do take the point that the regulations are before the committee, but you literally cannot understand the regulations without reading the code. They're inextricably linked, which causes a huge difficulty. There needs to be a very swift move to redraft that code.
Is there a need to publicly consult on the code before it's operationalised, do you think? Or
I think it just needs to be shortened. It's far too long and too directive and too difficult to navigate, and the thresholds in it are legally dubious. We've said all of this to the department before, and we're happy to sit down with them again, and we're happy to assist and support. But if it was up to me, I would go into a darkened room for 2 weeks and redraft it and shorten it down and make it more accessible and make it comply and sit comfortably with the 1996 order thresholds.
I think fundamentally, Chair, going back to your previous point, one of the biggest issues here has been transparency. Is we're trying to identify what has changed and why, rather than that being forthcoming. If that was forthcoming, then our review process would have been much easier. But as Rachel has said, we're spending a lot of time trying to identify what has changed and understand the reasons behind that and the possible impacts of it as well.
I could be wrong. I think we've asked the department for that. We flagged that right at the start to say that there was an issue that we were struggling to track what had changed, and I don't think that has arrived. But I'm happy to be corrected on that. So
the department feels that the explanatory memorandum
is sufficient,
is adequate for that purpose.
I mean, if you look at the RAISE paper, which is a stunning piece of work, I mean, we have relied heavily on it, and we're really grateful for it, for that work that 2 people have managed to do in a very short time. When you see how long that is and how detailed, I think it's 78 pages. And that's a bit of an overview. That tells you something. And the amount of scrutiny points in there, and we would agree with many of those. It is complicated. There's no two ways. It's the, even when the examiner for statutory rules comes to look at this, it's the affluction of time between when this was envisaged and where it is now, and the changes in society in that time.
We're in if nothing else, an unusual position. That those timelines are very odd. Like, I'm conscious of time and I've taken a bit too much time probably, so I'll bring the deputy chair in there.
Thanks, Chair. What has changed and why? Has there been any discussion at all with the department on that?
We've had a meeting with the department just before they released the regulations. I think they've met with a number of stakeholders, and we did have a meeting, but we didn't have the regulations at the time because the Assembly publishes those. So I think what they were trying to do was to go through the issues that we had raised in our consultation responses and assure us that they had considered all of those and they'd made a decision one way or the other, which of course they have to do. But we haven't had an opportunity. We have had a meeting with them then this week, Monday. I don't know what day it is anymore. I think it was Monday. We had a meeting with a lot of people from the EA and the DE, and it was a meeting where everybody got to air their views, and that was good. And we come out of that, and we've agreed that we'll continue to work together and talk and discuss things. But we still don't have any insight into what the changes are and why. We haven't been able to drill down into that, because that's quite a piece of work for us to be able to do, to sit down with the department. And we've had a fantastic working relationship with the department for years.
Would it not be easy for the department to point out the changes and explain why they have been made?
You can only assume that they have a working version where they can see the changes that have been made from the last version that's colour-coded or in some way tracked, or comments or something like that. So obviously they know why. Somebody went in and changed wording for a reason. Like, they took out, for example, the deleted parents from the statutory advices. Someone went in and decided to delete that. And we've made the point that we think that looks very bad indeed, and looks as if parents aren't important, and will also feed into the drafting of a statement, because the statutory advices end up in part 2 of the statement, which is special educational needs, and the first paragraph is usually a summary of parental advice. So that's now not going to be there. So it may be that they think, well, parents don't give advice, but you've taken it out, it was already in there. So it's things like that. we've spoken to them a little bit about, but we haven't really drilled down. The format of the statement is another very important one. They've got relevant health treatments and services is in Part 6, non-educational needs. That was an amendment to the SEND bill that came in through the committee and was debated in the Assembly, approved at the consideration stage and enacted in the SEND Act. And they have gone against the wishes of the Assembly and the Legislature and placed that into Part 6, non-educational, which makes it unenforceable and is exactly the opposite of why it was put in there in the first place. So they say to us that they've taken legal advice on that. We don't know what legal advice they've asked for, what legal advice they've been given. We have given them legal advice. We're very clear on what the legal position is on it. And it just makes no sense to us whatsoever. Why would you not want relevant treatments and services that serve the educational needs of children in the educational provision section of a statement, if it was not to avoid having to deal with health? We don't understand that. So there's a number of issues like that that we don't understand. There's probably issues that we don't even know about yet because we haven't scrutinised all of it. But there's about 15 or so points, I think, in the paper that we've given to you that we've identified so far.
Yeah, even point 14, for example, where the term has been changed from sufficient time to reasonable time in terms of LSE's rules. Why has that change been made? What's the intent behind that? And how will that practically change the position for LSEs? These are the sorts of questions that we're grappling with, which there are no answers even within the papers. You're trying to understand why these changes have been made.
And when the EA were with us recently, just after you published the letter and the statement, as far as they were concerned, your assertion that some aspects of this may be unlawful, they said that was wrong. What would your response be to that?
They haven't told us why it's wrong, and we don't believe that it is wrong. We believe that it is correct.
Well, Thomas said he had a master's in human rights law.
Well, I wish you'd explain to me then why it is lawful to go behind Article 16 of the 1996 order, which requires specification in statements. I mean, that was particularly in relation to the enhanced support model, and I'll read to you the part that caused me concern and that makes us believe that may be an unlawful process. So Article 16 of the 1996 order, which is about specification on statements, says that the EA has to determine the provision a child needs by making and maintaining a statement. So it has to determine. It has a duty to specify that provision in the statement that is to be made to meet the child's needs. And then it has a third duty, which is to arrange that provision. So it determines the provision, it specifies it, it arranges it. All very clear. In stating that it's the school that's going to make those decisions, the EA is delegating its own legal responsibilities to schools. That's our understanding of what they have written. And the facts here speak for themselves. The facts are what they are. This is what it says in the consultation. In the enhanced support model, schools will not have allocated classroom assistance hours, but quantified and specified needs to meet. This means there's greater freedom to recruit staff with the right skills to support their children and young people with SEN. The schools will not have to demonstrate links with individual children and young people. Rather, they will have to show how they will provide support that meets the overall needs of their SEN population. Schools will design the support packages within EA standards. So who there is determining, who is specifying? That is not the EA in that situation, it is schools. We are consistently getting information from statementing officers to our clients that then comes to us, that they write in response to requests for specification saying, oh, we don't specify that in statements, that's up to schools. And I'm going to read out to you, just in case I forget, because it's so important. One of my clients actually sent me some information that she got from a statementing officer in relation to her child who has cerebral palsy, autism and severe learning difficulties, and who for all of her life, and I've known her since she was about that height, all of her life she has required physiotherapy, occupational therapy, speech and language therapy and a range of other supports. She has classroom assistance support as well. We went to tribunal to get all of those provisions put into Part 3 of the statement because the EA refused to put them in as educational provision, even though there's a long line of case law requiring this. We got it all done. Then she had to move school. She got a new statement. They whitewashed it all out of the statement. We had to start again, getting it taken out of Part 6, non-educational, and put back into Part 3, educational. She's on another iteration of a statement now for transfer. And this is what was said to her by a statementing officer. And I want to know, what are they being trained on here? So they have said, access to OT and physio is documented at Part 6 of a child's statement. Access to these services is of a type specified and at a level quantified and as provided by Health and Social Care Trusts and not the Education Authority. OT and physiotherapy are considered non-educational as they are medical treatments or therapies delivered by medically trained professionals. As the therapies are health provision and not special educational provision, then the correct section of the statement for them to be in is Part 6. This will not disadvantage the child. It will, because it won't be enforceable. The parent has written this and I want to give her views on this whole situation. She has fought tooth and nail to get these in the educational section where they belong. She says, I can't believe that each time they send a new statement they keep moving from Part 3 to Part 6. It's exhausting and infuriating. The continual blindsiding of parents with a child with as complex needs as child is baffling, as her diagnoses have only been added to over the years and not taken away from. And then we come and get a new format of a statement that hasn't been flagged in any consultation that says that these go into Part 6, relevant treatments and services. So I rest my case. Those are the facts. If somebody wants to come and tell me another legal interpretation of that, I am ready and willing to listen to that.
Just going to
Just
invite the
finally,
Chair for a
quick
point,
one.
Jen, and
Yeah,
then we'll move to the next
Just,
member.
I mean, this is all very technical and complex. There's a massive volume of material. I don't think anybody in this committee is claiming to be an expert. I'm certainly not anyway. And it's one of the reasons we go to organisations like the Children's Law Centre. In fact, as far as I'm concerned, in any children's rights issue, particularly children with special educational needs, when constituents come to me, if I don't know immediately what to do, I signpost them to the Children's Law Centre. And this, as far as I can see, is critical to how children, the rights of children, particularly those with additional needs, are supported within the education system. So in the context of all that we're dealing with here today, what advice are you giving this committee? What should we do?
We think it is essential that we pause this process in some form or other and allow sufficient time, because the other option is, if the department doesn't come with us on this and pause it and give us time, there's a possibility this won't be affirmed and the whole lot will be pulled down, and nobody wants that. So it's much better to pause and take a breath. They can still do a lot of things on an operational level to try and, manage the budget and all of that. They're doing it anyway. But we need to get the legal framework right. If we allow the legal framework to be weakened by a process that was meant to strengthen it, we are doing a grave disservice to children and young people, and we couldn't possibly stand over that.
Thank you. So I have an indication from Cara.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you so much for being here. We know how hard you work and really appreciate you being here today. In the interest of time, I have about 3 questions. The first one is just around parents of children who have special educational needs always voice they feel helpless and hopeless. They're up against what is a big and complex system. So taken as a whole, do these regulations, do you feel they sufficiently rebalance power towards our children and our families? Or do they largely preserve a system where parents still have to become a sort of legal expert in their own right to basically advocate to get basic provision for their children?
Yes, I think in both directions, I suppose. In a sense, there are some strengthening of rights for children and young people. For example, over compulsory school age, they would have their own appeal rights. But when you look at how parents are being taken out of the advice-giving part of the regulations and even just the visuals of that and what that looks like, it looks like they're being disempowered. Mm-hmm. If our teachers and school leaders can't get a grip on this and can't understand it, what earthly chance do parents have? Mm-hmm. And the department might take the view, well, look, the code of practice isn't for parents, but actually it's for everybody. There's duties to have regard to the code of practice. And we would very often give the current code of practice to parents and say, look, this is really well written. It's plain English. If you want to look about annual reviews, go to the chapter on annual reviews and have a read of it and you'll understand. Well, we couldn't possibly say that about the current one. Mm-hmm. If we can't understand it and we don't trust it, mm-hmm. then how can we ask someone else to do so? It's 4 times as long. So I think there is a fear on our part and a concern, and based on the facts that I've said to you there, that makes me think there is a move to take the opportunity to weaken the system in favour of public authorities.
There are some very positive things. For example, it reinforces the independence of DARS, which is the Dispute Avoidance and Resolution Service. The mediation obviously is a very strong and useful tool as well to avoid the stress and anxiety for families of having to go to tribunal. So there are some really, really exceptionally good things. One of the things that concerns me, and it is linked to the ESM model, the enhancement model, is that annual reviews are changing. As what we called an annual review will now be a periodic review, which will happen at the milestones for children, every key stage, and on transition. And there's not going to be a meeting now at every year. So parents, there is a caveat that parents can request that meeting, but that's okay for parents who have the wherewithal and the understanding or have been down that line before and they're going to ask. Yeah. But we come across many, many parents who don't have that. Without the support, without coming to us and asking, they're not going to know, well, actually, this is my right and I can do that and I can get involved and engaged in that discussion about my child's statement. So we're very concerned about some of the rolling back on those parental opportunities for participation and involvement in their child's outcomes within their statement. So I think there's a mixed match of things. Some things are very positive, which we won't be challenging, and some things we're concerned about.
You don't know what you don't know. That's why you're so important. And the fact that you're afraid, there's an element of fear, and you're the legal experts, I think really causes me and arguably many on this committee to have a real concern. Just following up from that then, what in your view is the greatest risks around this if the regulations are implemented before the system is truly ready for change? What's your biggest concern?
Results in worse outcomes for children.
Yeah.
That children who have needs or do not have those needs met, and that we continue down the route that we've been over the last 20 years, which is consistent appeal and challenge around decisions and processes around meeting the needs of children with special educational needs and disabilities. I think it is literally as simple as that.
Yeah, that's summarised.
That we can, that as in the paper, as was in our public letter, that we continue to repeat the mistakes of the past.
I mean, if the enhanced support framework is not going to impact in any way on parents and in time children's rights of appeal, then why, we have asked the question, do they need to issue new guidance on the statutory assessment and statement process? Because the reason they're doing that is so the EA operatives can start from September looking at every new statement and decide, what are we going to do to augment this so that children's individual rights are not going to be maintained and they're not going to be enforceable. Now that's at the worst, but that's the concern that we have.
It's a really scary time, and just speaking with parents as well, it's the uncertainty I think fills them with a lot of dread. Just lastly then, the department, when it comes to implementing these regulations, do you feel, and I can suspect what the answer is going to be, but do you feel they've demonstrated enough that the Education Authority, the likes of our health and social care trusts, our education psychology services, our tribunal system are adequately resourced and ready for further change?
We'd have to ask for a brief response on this. We're really up against it with time,
I would say something particularly in relation to the regs and the upper limit. In one respect, having an upper limit on a statement is a good thing because we have seen the statutory assessment process roll on without ever ending for months and months and months and months. So in one respect, that's good. When we looked at the regulations in relation to the extension of time with valid exceptions for health and social care trusts to provide advices, basically, previously in the last version of the regulations, basically if they were looking for additional time, they had to go and get that approved by the EA. Now it's in the hands of the trust to just say we need the extra time, and they just send in a notice saying this is in the new regs. Well, we're taking the extra time, and this is the reason. So there's a really big concern in terms of now we know there are huge pressures on health and social care trusts to provide those advices, to do that in addition to their other duties and responsibilities in the health world. But if there's not very, very clear review, monitoring and, in looking at those when the valid exceptions are used, I think they can be open to abuse.
Yeah.
And I think ultimately you could have children, just as a matter of course, waiting up to the 34 weeks rather
We
than...
have to listen as well to our teaching and non-teaching workforce, who are very strongly saying to us that they feel really overwhelmed and ill-equipped. A lot of this is about capacity building for schools, and this is not the department's fault. The capacity of, in a sense, it's to do with budget and availability of money and resources and finance. The capacity of schools has actually slipped back, and all of this is built on an increased capacity to include and provide for children. And we have that shift in complexity of the population in mainstream schools as well. So we're not saying that we need to make changes happen and we need to keep moving. But this is not the bit of the process to rush, if you know what I mean. This is the bit to be careful about.
Well articulated. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Apologies, and again, as the theme of the day is, we are under pressure with time with these regs and with our agenda today, so I do want to make sure everybody gets the opportunity to come in. Michelle, you're next.
Thank you, Chair. Folks, genuine thanks for raising this with us the way that you have and for the interventions that you've made. I think we're a bit overwhelmed looking at this. If you're overwhelmed, I feel like really justified in how I'm feeling. Some of the changes are already being implemented operationally right now. So there's no legal basis, but they haven't been passed yet. So where does that leave children's schools, EA department legally in terms of that operational role?
I think it's very dubious legally. I mean, it's fine if everything works out well in the end, in a sense. But if it comes to the point where a challenge becomes necessary, you're looking at a procedurally dubious process whereby a code has been brought in through the back door. We've been saying this for several years now. It's documented all over the place. We've been saying it in project advisory groups to the EA. You're bringing in the code. You're calling it the graduated response framework. If you compare the two side by side, which one of our solicitors has been doing, you can see it's basically the same document, the same wording is being used across those two things. All of the EA's training materials and training support materials have been prepared along the lines of this draft code. The draft code and guides attached to it were published on their website, and for some reason, guides for parents. I'm not quite sure exactly when they were published. I think it might have been around 2024 or so. It has infiltrated, it's like weeds, it has infiltrated the system before we've finished scrutinising. And the reason for that is partly because of all the delays. Obviously the department money has been given to do the training, and they want to spend the money and do the training and upskill the workforce, but at the same time we're now looking at it and going, there's problems with this, you've trained on it. The EA is not going to want to roll back on any of the code of practice because it's done all the training on that. It's really messy.
I mean, they say it's informed and co-designed by the Senkos who have been at the training as well. So, they're justifying the content on that basis. But, I mean, we don't think it's fit for purposes of document, not just for school, it's for schools, but also for legal advisors, for parents. I mean, they say that they're going to do some easy reads and, online resources to make it simpler. Yeah. But that's not available now.
The current code is perfectly good in that sense, very accessible. It should be along a similar line to that.
It's 90 pages with glossaries and annexes, as opposed to 400 pages.
It's like a dog's den.
The original one was 90 pages.
That's good. I just mean this whole process.
That's good. We're looking at 400 now.
So it's not necessarily the department's fault. I'm keen to say that, some of it might be the departments in the department, some of the delay might be with the department. A lot of the delay isn't. Just as we were about to start moving, the assembly suspended, we got back, the teams changed. We lost Sharon Lawler and Jan Matthews, who we worked very closely with in the department. We had a very good working relationship. A new team came in again, built up a very good working relationship, and some of them are still going. And the doors have always been open, and there's been conversation. But then there was another pause, and then 5 years have elapsed without any conversation, really. And now we're left trying to pick up the pieces. Everyone's left trying to pick up the pieces.
Yeah. In a changed world, where we are post-COVID, where, the presenting need has substantially changed as well.
Yeah, things like COVID, which you can't plan for, they come out of the blue, but things like collapse of the assembly, it's just a great illustration of why that's completely unacceptable. Anybody can do that. You mentioned about the time passing and the impact that has. I think if we don't get this right, there are consequences for the children. One thing I wanted to raise, because you've covered some of the stuff I was going to ask, it's been raised with me recently in terms of a statement that when kids are transitioning into adult services, if the statement says learning difficulty and doesn't say learning disability, then they have problems accessing those adult services. So I want to know, in terms of these regulations and the provisions in them, if that's something that can be helpful for resolving that issue now, It feels like it's a new issue, but it's
never been within the remit of these regulations,
Okay.
because these regulations they come from the 1996 order, which talks about learning difficulty.
okay.
And a learning difficulty and a learning disability are not the same thing
Yeah.
under those definitions. Learning disability is a health concept,
Mhm.
and it would be a health professional, so it would require close cooperation between health and education to fix that problem, because a learning disability is IQ based, whereas a learning difficulty may not be.
I guess that's where I wanted to go next, is in terms of that cooperation between health and education. Can you tell me more about how that's going to operate based on these regulations, and any concerns that you have about that? Because it seems it's so many things to do with SEND that is really critical, and it doesn't happen effectively.
Yeah, there's a cooperation clause that's been
Yeah.
brought in through the SEND Act, and then there's another separate duty for health to help education, and that's around identifying the relevant health services and treatments as well. That duty to help is subject to resources. And that so that the trusts could eventually say legitimately, we'd like to help you, but we don't have the resources, so we're going to leave you to it. Then the EA would have to go and source it privately. We tried to get that changed at the time, but it wasn't agreed. It wasn't changed. So health has to help. They have to identify needs. They do need to work together, and I mean the impression we have over the last while is that there's a level of cooperation in terms of maybe data sharing and things like that, but we're at a very early stage of cooperation. We're not where we should be. I know there's a health education oversight group that meets monthly, and I'm not really overly aware about what progress has been made there. It might be good to find out a bit more about that. But generally the impression I get is that even looking at the enhanced support model, there's a move away from working with health. It's nearly an attitude of, well, they're not going to help us, so we're going to go off and do our own thing. But where are you going to get these people to do your own thing with?
Yeah.
There's not spare speech and language therapists sitting around out there. They're serving the health service. So it's all very difficult, and those are challenges we all have to face, that there's a shortage of the workforce and we have to use what we have better. I think that's fair enough. But that cooperation piece, I think, is a very important scrutiny point in this.
Okay, thank you. Appreciate that.
Thank you. Michelle, Donna, you'd indicated next.
Sure. Thank you so much. I sort of just want to start around that implementation through the back door, because we hear officials all the time coming in, and you would think everything was rosy in the gardens, really, with the direction they're going. I think it's a real arrogance of what they've done here in implementation and putting resources in it, because it's going to be very difficult to get them to roll back from something that they're so committed to. Like, they're not... Like, a pause to do it. We've been asked for so long, even like 2 years ago I was asking, where are these rates, where are these? None of them may come, and then they just come with this, with no sort of warning. Like, it's... I'm trying to be kind to them by saying it's arrogance.
I think they're in a fixed position at the moment.
Yeah.
And we need to get them out of it.
Yeah. That's a massive problem. And then I have...
We'll be helping them by doing that, because if we can get some movement on these important provisions, then the whole thing could move forward in a much more cooperative manner.
So it also worries me when we go back to some of the debates that happens in the chamber. The minister will go up and say, no child should ever need a statement. That all sounds brilliant in an ideal world, but when you see this coming through, they're almost showing you what they're doing. You've removed the statement, or you dilute it. You're taking away the rights of a parent and a child. That's what it looks like to me. And I'm not a legal expert in any sort of way. I really am relying on the evidence you're given. But
if the reforms work, the number of statements will fall off naturally, because children will get early intervention.
In a utopian society, you would have the local impact teams would be delivering at that early stage, at stage 2, and they'd be delivering every single time, and they'd be given a level of support that would take a child out of the need to require a statement. Not every child, but a large proportion of children. But we know the evidence that we are getting, the evidence that the EA have given to the committee, is they're understaffed, under-resourced. They don't have, even if they had the money now, they wouldn't be able to find the staff to make that viable for every child who is waiting. We're talking to, we're going out and we're talking to principals and Senkos, and we're going to union meetings and things to get a flavour for what's happening on the ground. And we're hearing from Senkos, they're so frustrated, they're exhausted. The responsibility now with the PLPs and the wider strategic focus within the school in developing plans, all of that is falling to the support, the support coordinators. But the PLP is now, what used to be the gateway was the educational psychologist to get a service. Now it's the PLP. So The PLP is the most important document. It has to be revised, it has to be created, so they're not all created yet. It has to be monitored, it has to be reviewed. All of the services that the child is getting, if there's any delay to services, should all be on that document, and that should follow that child as a living document all the way through their journey in education. So it's a very, very significant role. But they're overwhelmed because whenever they go to look for a service, they have to provide the PLP. They have to document all of the tests and internal processes that have happened in a school to show that what they have implemented hasn't progressed to a stage. Also, they're now being asked under the new provisions to put in place whole school provision. That will be another, we see, potentially a barrier to children moving through and being registered as SEN and moving down the process of getting access to support. So I think the overwhelm in the profession, in the teaching profession, is really, really significant, and I don't think we can avoid doing something about that.
What I pick up from the school leaders that I talk to is that, and again, they're being flooded with many different consultations and changes. Like, we're just here talking about SEN, but when you look at Transform Ed, for example, the curriculum reform is huge in itself, and these are running parallel to them. Like, they're overwhelmed, but what they're really concerned is that almost like it's all going to get dumped on them. You know, these changes could mean that the responsibility and probably judicial reviews could end up landing at the doors of a school rather than the Education Authority. That's the view that is building within the school leaders that I'm talking to. Would that be a fair...
Last thing we want is to put schools in a position where they exercise the challenge function. Schools do have responsibilities, and that the purpose behind this whole school provision was to make sure that schools do everything they can within their resources, and they should do that for their children, and they do largely do that, but all schools need to pull their weight in that. But if we delegate too much responsibility to schools, with great responsibility and power comes great difficulty potentially, because if you've made the decision about designing the package and someone doesn't agree with it, then you're in a position where you've got to challenge the school. I think we all know, and you would know in your constituency work, and we know in our work, that that's the worst possible path to go down, because the child has to go there every day. Teachers need to be teaching, not fighting judicial reviews and having to do legal processes. We don't want legal processes coming into this. We want the EA to maintain their responsibilities, and that they can, stand over their decisions that they are legally obliged to take, and not try to push that towards schools.
But is there danger of these regulations as they're standing in the code of practice that is actually going to be the outwork on something?
Well, when you take them together with all the things that the EA is doing that are inextricably linked, there is a danger of that, potentially, subject to us receiving other information or more information that clarifies otherwise.
If you're pushing back children from getting into the statutory arena, then obviously the legal challenges won't come to bite. So you're putting the responsibility on the schools, knowing that they can't deliver. They're not equipped. They don't have the capacity. They haven't had the training, and But the EA know that if you haven't gone to the statutory processes, you don't have an appeal right. So I think that there's a real risk.
There is a concept of putting a team around the child within the school, which sounds great and would be great. But are we going to be able to do that, is the question.
Final point. Because a very recent case of mine was an actual link officer contacted a parent and saying, could we remove the SLD to MLD and then I'll get the child placed such because I can't get the place there. I think that was only a couple of weeks ago. So that's the type of stuff that's going on right now. And this worries me even more that the legal protections will completely go.
I think we're sliding back to where we started and a bit further back than that.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Move to the next member, and that's David.
Thanks very much, Chair, and thanks for your presentation so far. I had a few questions, but I think I'm going to jump back to probably where you were finishing off with Michelle. Just it's something probably I've been interested in for a number of sessions we've had. And that you were talking there about the lack of cover. You feel that the enhanced support model is about almost the department moving on to see what it can do itself, because it doesn't feel that support is coming from health. Officials, when they've come to us, are understandably reticent to speak against officials in other departments. Even if for understandable reasons, is it your observation that in terms of the impact teams, that the problem is largely with health not wanting or not being willing or able to become fully integrated partners with those teams?
I I think there's a huge problem with that lack of integration. I think you've hit on there a really important question about the relationship between health and education. Health has a duty to help education. That's been strengthened through the SEND Act if it's implemented to say that they shall help on request, although it's still subject to their resources. I think there has been maybe a failure of communication between the two, and that when plans are being made, I think health sometimes feel like SPIMS have all been opened and now they're looking at us to service. I'm sure we didn't know they were coming. Or education will feel very much, well, health are taking the nurses out of school, now we can't manage without that. And it's all coming from lack of resources, obviously. Health are trying to protect their resources, education are trying to protect theirs. But under the Children's Services Cooperation Act, we would really like to see health and education making a very concerted effort to sit down and go, how can we help each other and pool our human and financial and resources and other resources and make things better for the children that we all serve. They're the same children. So health should be helping education, and education should be talking to health when they're making plans. I haven't heard a lot in a lot of the discourse has been about classroom assistance. We're always talking about that, but what about that integrated support? I think that's a really important thing to raise, and I would like to see more conversation about that.
I think I've always felt that education officials, when they come before us, always try to reassure us. Certainly the Minister even reassures that he's up, that those conversations are happening. I don't always feel, I think, from the health side, that's as enthusiastic, and I understand that they face huge pressures, although we look into next year and see that education's facing 600 million deficit. So, I mean, what that will mean moving on will be not interesting to watch. I'm fearful of what that will mean for the system. You've talked and you spoke on it earlier, but in terms of, you believe that enhanced support model is could be unlawfully delegating more to schools. Can you help me to understand what exactly it is you think is being delegated directly to schools and what?
Yes, it's what I spoke about earlier. Really, it comes down to articles. I could do half a day of training on this, by the way. And I
think the problem for all of this is we could speak about it for a long time.
Yeah,
can't get into 5 minutes.
I try not to overburden people. It's about the format of statements. The enhanced support model seems to be very much focused on statemented children. I'd love to see it focusing more on pre-statemented children, to be honest, but I can't understand the match between the two. This is something we want to hear from EA when we get the chance to speak to them about it more. But the enhanced support model, if you take Article 16 of the 1996 order, that's the duty for the Education Authority to determine the provision. So the EA has to identify those children for which it's responsible, who may have SEN, and then it has to determine the provision that they require, so it's got the legal duty to determine that. But the enhanced support model is saying schools will design the packages. Then it has the duty to specify that provision on an individual child basis. It's special educational needs, not everyone's educational needs, and statements are for individuals. So the duty to specify is about individual children. So in saying that schools don't have to link it to individual children and they get to design the packages, I can see the rationale behind it. The rationale is we don't have enough money here, and we think children might do better in doing group work, so we're going to put pooled resources into schools. Give the school, here's a bit of this and a bit of that. You can decide what you need.
Is there recognition? I know you've talked about teaching unions, and I genuinely, almost every school that I've went into, I've raised this question because I recognise coming on this committee, I was not an education expert and I wanted to soak it up from my local schools. Nearly every mainstream school that I've spoke to around this says to me they would rather have more autonomy around resources, because they feel that rather than having 6 classrooms, they very much value their classroom assistants, and there are pains to put that across to you, but rather than have an over subscription of classroom assistants in their view at the back of a classroom, they would rather have some of that resource in order to bring in an extra teacher that could specialise and help with that, or support their work in other ways. Different people
no difficulty with
and some
that.
of them are doing that at the minute and see the benefit of that.
There's no difficulty with that. That's happening. We know that 150 schools at least, from what the EA tells us, have been innovative and have come up. We see it in individual cases where it's a crisis and we have to repurpose the funding and make sure the child gets something else that fits their individual needs. There's no difficulty with that legally, as long as you can specify in the statement. You don't have to put one-to-one classroom assistants in loads of statements. I don't know what proportion of statements actually have that. It's only the ones where parents fight for it. Most of them just say access to a level of classroom assistance. The EA gives a bunch of money to the school and then they decide what to do, which is potentially unlawful. The unlawful part of it is who determines what the child shall have and who specifies it. You can specify anything. It doesn't, any provision. It can be a range of provision. It doesn't have to be one-to-one classroom assistance. So if the school and the parents and everyone is agreed, and you then change the statement and put that in the statement, you don't have to be overly rigid or prescriptive if that doesn't suit the needs of the child. So it all comes down to that individual. If you've got a school, obviously you've got a group of individuals, and you might need to think as a school, how do we manage child A, child B and child C? And that's where you have conversations with the EA. But the way this has been set out at the moment, we are extremely concerned about the lawfulness of it and the enforceability of it. If you as an individual child and your parent can't see what you have in your statement, then you can't enforce it if someone decides not to bother giving it. And that's really our only concern about that. We're on the same page in a lot of sense with what's needed in terms of change.
Just want to make three very brief
no,
points
sorry,
on
Catherine,
the
just a final point, and then we will have to draw
the
this one to a
enhanced
close.
support model. It's not operational. Basically, it's a grand scheme thing. It's not operational. It doesn't say how schools are going to implement it in the current consultation document. But the key thing is that it is happening now that they're looking at it this year. To see with those schools that they've been working with already, try and model and try to look at what can be produced. I think it should have happened before you were implementing the code and the regulations, so that you had some idea of what were the other alternative models for provision. I think if it was specified in the statement what a child was going to get through alternative means, that's fine as long as it's specified. And the other one final thing I want to say is in relation to the funding. The way it's set out, it's 3-strand funding. First funding is in relation to looking at the profile of the school, kind of like a blanket funding. Then there's training and what the other resources the school might need. And then there's the individual funding beyond that. So that worries me, because the continuum is that there'll be very few children who will be remaining who have that level of provision that they require statement. So if you look at that, and if there was more explanation as to how the funding would be, and I mean, the big problem for us is the document as it stands, we can't make head nor tail as how it's going to work. And I think the problem for the department and the EA is that they're yet to test it and see. There's lots of different individual schools who've been doing things, but now the first year is looking at, okay, how do we gather the data? How do we gather the information? There may be better ways to do things, but I think that they're doing it a bit late.
I guess all I would finish on, all I would say is that we shouldn't just do something quickly for the sake of doing it, but I do have an abiding fear that of the opportunity cost in terms of we already have a broken system, a system that's not meeting need and that's under-resourced because the executive doesn't have the resource, let's be honest about it. That if we don't reform, we don't move forward, what we're going to end up with is a collapse of an unsustainable system. Thank you, Chair.
We can do these things that you were talking about without a new model. I don't know what the new model is. I haven't seen a model. Those changes can be made under the current system.
Thank you, and that's probably a good place to leave it, because I think we have the department here next week, and for me that needs to be at the core of the evidence that we take, because I worry they will try and suggest that you can't do SEN reform without doing these regs now, and I think we've begun to sort of feel our way into a position where we can still do SEN reform, and perhaps we already are, and if it is about testing new models and how that might work within the existing framework, then you can refine your regs to work with what a new model might look like. So there's
not the point to rush.
And I think if you're going to rush anything, it shouldn't be legislation, so we need to be really, really clear on that. So look, I really, really appreciate your time. Apologies if the session in any way felt rushed, because we are dealing with a lot of material. We have a big agenda today. We will see what comes of the evidence session next week with the department. I have one just really practical question to ask, because I think a very clear recommendation came through is this tracking of changes, and that seems like such a sort of basic thing. We have sought that and not got it. If we're specifically asking, we're looking between the previous draft regs and the new draft regs, just to track the changes between those. Those are the two key documents.
I suppose you'd want to compare. It'd be easiest to compare the current regulations and the new ones. We will obviously look at the in-between versions, but I wouldn't expect others to do that. I think if you look at what have we got now and what are we changing to, that would be useful.
the current and the draft. So we don't need to worry about the in-between ones. That's fine. So I think we should seek that again if members are agreed with the department before.
It would be
we
useful to have any variations to the code as well, but that might be a bit of a stretch at this point.
A lot is the 90 to 400 pages, but yeah, we can certainly ask.
It would be a big ask. Yeah.
Okay. No, thank you all for your time. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Can I just check with members, and it may be worthwhile just at this point, we are really up against it with time, so may not have time to look at it in great detail. We do also have a memo in your pack, so just draw members' attention to that from the Senior Assistant Clerk in relation to the citizen space responses that have come through. If it is okay in terms of data, I would want to suggest perhaps that we share those with the department as well. Is that something in terms of data we're allowed to do GDPR wise? I think so the department get a sense of what's coming through in terms of the concerns, because there were quite clear themes I think came through, particularly in early years actually, which we didn't cover today. So if members are agreed on that, as well as seeking the track change document, we can take that forward. Aside from that, is there anything else that we would want to be raising with the department on the back of that, or are we really looking to next week for next steps?
I suppose it may actually be included in all of that, but we should be writing to the department and asking them to pause. I mean, that's the advice that we got from the Children's Law Centre there, that there should be a pause and greater collaboration with children's rights experts on all of this. I mean, the concerns that were raised here today are very serious and could have long-term implications in terms of children's rights, particularly for children with special needs. So, I mean, it just makes sense not to be rushing this.
Yeah, I agree. I think that is a clear theme, and I want to be clear, not saying we don't do SEND reform, saying that we need to do it right. I think, Michelle, you'd indicated there.
Yeah, I mean, I think so you used this language about this feels like you would need a proper committee stage almost for it, that we need to maybe just extend this whole process so that we can do justice to it. I don't know at which juncture we would have that conversation, but it almost feels inevitable.
Well, look, I mean, I'm going to suggest, I know, Deputy Chair, I'll bring you in a wee second there, Danny, you'd suggest but right into the department. Would it make sense to hear from them next week and almost to take that as a stock take? Okay, well, what's their response to what we've heard?
I was going to say, Chair, without start speaking about Pat's proposal directly, I think that proposal itself probably comes more properly, I think, after you've heard from the department next week. And
my sense to hear from them. Danny, I'll bring you in, and then we'll come to a decision on that.
Can I have one more thing that I was going to raise?
Oh, sorry. Apologies, Michelle.
Rachel mentioned a health education oversight group, and she'd want to know more about that. Is that something we could find out more about?
Yeah, it's a bit of a mysterious group. I don't quite know what it does. Yeah. We should certainly, I mean, we can seek, ask the department to provide details on that in their briefing, if that's helpful. Yeah, if that's something we can do. And Danny, sorry.
Yeah, I was just going to say, just from my perspective, I don't think it'll matter what the department says next week after listening to that evidence. My opinion is that really going to change, and maybe for them coming in, that they will know that it could be the recommendation from the committee, that certainly members anyway on the committee, that a pause needs to happen. There's just no way there's anything they can say next week will reassure any of us or change anything, and I think it's really worrying what we heard today, really worrying.
Look, I mean, I think that the evidence was very clear today. I'm not particularly concerned in the sequencing of when we write to the department or not. My sense would be we should probably give them the right of reply next week in terms of their response to that. If members are content that we wait to the evidence session and then we take stock at that stage of where we are. Ultimately, the timescales on this are entirely within the committee's gift to dictate, where we're not under any ticking clock with a committee stage as we would be with primary legislation. I think the only time pressure is really one that the department would seek to apply. So we have scope here to run this process as we see fit. So. Okay, is that the way? Are we agreed in terms of taking that forward then? And I think it's just we put on record again. It was raised last week, just the quality of the raised paper and also the material from the senior assistant clerk has all been very helpful. So I want to put that on record. Okay, item 7 on the agenda then is an oral briefing from a group of students from St Mary's University College on the initial teacher education bursary scheme. So I would refer members to the clerk's note at page 94, correspondence from the witnesses at pages 96 to 98, and the Minister's response to the committee on the scheme previously supplied, which is at page 103, and then we have briefing papers at pages 85 and 86 of tabled papers. So I'll welcome all of you here, and I'll make sure. I think we've had a couple of additional witnesses added, but I'll go through what I have on my list here, and then we can make a start. So we have Ben O'Hagan, who is on the post-primary mathematics Bachelor of Education degree, is that correct? Yep. That's from St Mary's University College. And then we also have Maud Barr from the same course, Jacinta King. And we also have Ryan Davey from the same course, and then I think also joining us we have Quilcha Hamill, the president of the St Mary's Students' Union, if that's got all of that correct. Okay, you're all very welcome here today. I would just emphasise at the start, the committee was keen to hear from you, but we were clear that our agenda is big this week, so this is a shorter briefing than we would normally take. So I would just ask for opening remarks to be up to 5 minutes at this stage, and then we can move to question and answer. So it's over to yourselves. Is it Ben? Are you kicking off? Yeah.
So our sort of idea was that the initial teacher education bursary is currently coming into effect with September 2026. The issue is that it's coming until new entrants and not coming until affect those that are already in the training to be teachers. We understand the department is under significant financial pressure. The issue that we have is that we are willing to continue to teach, and we are training to teach because that's what we chose to do. And our suppose our argument is the fact that we have that we are in the classrooms at the minute, and we are in the process of training. The department is currently allocated £20,000, so £5,000 per student per year, to be able to train in St Mary's and Stramalas. However, for us that are already in it, we have been excluded from that bursary scheme, and we feel that because we are being excluded, that those that are coming after us, that are sitting in the same classroom in September, are being classified as being worth more because they are getting their tuition fees paid for while we're stuck in debt. I suppose our biggest thing at the minute is that both St Mary's and Stramalas are teacher training colleges, and we are training to be teachers. The department released last week the initial teacher education curriculum, which we are now going to be following. There's also the Transform Aid that's coming out in 2029. Which myself, that'll be the year I graduate, and Jacinta and Maud, you will be graduating the year before, so we will be the first ones to teach that curriculum. And one of the clauses of the teaching bursary is that we have to teach Northern Ireland for 2 years, and if by giving us the bursary for the remainder of our degree, you are ensuring that we will stay in Northern Ireland for at least 2 years, and it means then that we would be able to take the first cohort of curriculum in the new Transform Aid. Whereas if we don't get this funding, the risk is that we may not be able to stay in Northern Ireland and we may move elsewhere, and therefore the issue is that we won't have the teachers there to start the Transform Aid. I suppose I want to maybe mention to Ryan. Ryan's a 4th year student in the technology cohort. He's currently finishing his degree. Today is actually his last day. So he's actually one of the ones that are now, because he never got a bursary, he's now in student debt and now has to look at other meetings. So Ryan, I suppose.
Yeah, so to establish my personal case, I've previously completed a uni degree, so I'm already in my 2nd term of student loans. I'm close to £80,000 in student debt, on top of 2 personal loans to actually pay for my first 2 years out of pocket, because student finance would not cover it. So to find out in my final year that if I simply deferred for 4 years, that I would not have gained an additional £40,000 of debt on top of personal loans to pay for that was disheartening, to say the least.
Yeah. And I suppose the issue that we have is we don't come here and ask for, back pay. That's not what we're here for. We're asking for parity. We're asking for, well, if you're going to provide the money and the support for those that are currently going to be starting our degree, why aren't you supporting those that are currently in the degree and have chosen for the love of teaching? I suppose the issue that really got us was the fact that the Education Minister also announced the PGCE bursary, which is £1,000 per month. For living costs and your fees paid for. Now for myself, who is a year 1 BEd student, I can very easily transfer over to Queen's University in Belfast and do my year 2 and year 3 and transfer my credits, and then do my PGCE, which means I will then be leaving at the same time as my colleagues in St Mary's, but I will have a PGCE which was paid for, and I would be getting £1,000 per month for the PGCE, which I wouldn't be getting if I was in St Mary's. So I suppose my issue is the department wants people to come into initial teacher education and wants people to train to be teachers, but it's financially better for us if we left St Mary's and went to Queen's and done a PGCE after that, and we would still come out at the same time, and we would have our PGCE paid for and the money that we would be getting every month.
And in my role as Students' Union President, throughout the year I've had the opportunity to speak to a lot of students, a lot more than are just sitting at this table, from all different primary, post-primary, PGCE educational backgrounds. And with the announcement of the ITE bursary, and as well as Ben alluded to, the PGCE scheme, and also the new incoming scheme for Irish subsidiary and primary subjects, the current students, especially those who are in their first couple of years of education in those subjects, training to be teachers, who would be the first teachers to come actually in and address the shortages in those sectors within the educational sector, are completely disheartened, and a lot of their first reactions were, as Ben mentioned, finding alternatives, whether it be even dropping out, waiting a few years and going again, which is then detrimental to the idea of addressing the shortages of work people in those areas. It doesn't seem fair or rational. It doesn't seem to align with the department's clear, I guess, dedication to filling teaching shortages in those educational sectors. And as Ben has mentioned, and he's presented a very good alternative bursary scheme, I just hope that it's listened to and received well within the department.
Thank you. Just one question from me, really. Well, maybe we'll see where we go with it. It's just in terms of your engagement with the department or the minister. Have you had any direct engagement? Have you had the opportunity of a meeting or to set out any of this with departmental officials at all?
The only correspondence we had was what I shared with the committee. We have not been able to secure any meeting or anything. The response from the Education Minister was that it wouldn't provide value for money.
And I suppose the response on the committee has had similar response through. It's effectively that there's got to be a cut-off point somewhere. So I suppose just to give you the opportunity to set out why do you think the cut-off should be set where you're requesting it? What's the rationale there?
So I suppose the reason is, like, we're here from maths and technology. That is what the Education Minister defined as shortage subjects within that needs support. We're not coming here and asking you to provide support for every degree subject, because they're not all shortage subjects. Maths and technology is shortage subjects. If we look at across the waters and we look at England, they are given £28,000 a year for a bursary. If you go to train over there, they also offer teaching degree apprenticeships, which is a 4-year apprenticeship scheme for undergrads, and at the end of the 4 years you become a qualified teacher, and you have no tuition fees, and you also get your salary every year. If you look across down south, they also offer an incentive for joining, and whenever you get a first time job, you will receive that incentive as a way to try and keep teachers in and try and promote teachers. But I just feel like because teachers we have 3 years to do, the other two have 2 years to do, that for us, when we sit in the lecture theatre with the other students that are coming in 2026, it's the issue of, well, they're getting their fees paid for and we're not. And there was, I think you said earlier, that there was 130 maths students applied this year for St Mary's, and there was 30 applied for technology. And in contrast to what there is this year, there are 11 in post-primary maths and there are 7 in technology. So I suppose our issue is, we decided to train to be teachers because we wanted to be teachers. Has there been an outstanding number of people who want to teach now since this has came on board, or what is the reason that they want to now join the teaching career? And I suppose we are, in contrast to the Education Minister, we are value for money because we chose it without the incentive. Now all we're asking is that we are not excluded from the incentive because we are already in training.
Thank you. I'll bring in any other members. Deputy Chair first.
Thanks, Chair, and thanks for coming in and explaining all of that to us. I'm entirely sympathetic with the position you're in. What can we do about it as a committee? very little. We don't have a particularly influential relationship with the department or the minister. But I would say to you that I'll make a proposal that the committee writes to the department and ask that they meet you and consider the proposal that you're putting forward. So, thanks.
Yeah, that would be brilliant, because as I mentioned beforehand, Ben has put a lot of time in and put together a fantastic, what he calls a tapered model for the IT bursary scheme, and it leaves no stone unturned. You've already mentioned the department has identified, or the minister has identified, math and technology as those shortage subjects. I think it's vital that the quicker solutions, which are the teachers that are already in training, who are going to be in the classrooms within the next 2-3 years before those who enrol next year, are also addressed and listened to in that time as well. Because, as I mentioned beforehand, there is a real threat that those who are currently in studying first, second and third year, in my conversations with them, they're becoming more and more disheartened as time goes on, and that could then raise really big red flags whenever it does come to addressing those shortage areas in the nearer future than in the next 4 years, after those new enrolments from next year are in the classroom as well.
Could I just add, Ryan, I don't know if you want to share your plans for after you leave?
Yeah, so in order to combat my student debt, my options really were to leave. Because of the teacher salary here and the fact that I'd be repaying my student loan so soon, I went to Dubai. So my job plans are to leave the country. So the idea that this scheme could have completely combated that, because ideally I would like to stay. I'm from West Belfast. I would like to teach in a West Belfast school. I'd like to bring things back into my own community. But in the situation that I'm in, I have limited options. And speaking to the idea of students deciding to leave, I personally know of 3 students who were first year at the time, they would have now been second year, who left the subject and are reapplying this year in order to get this scheme. So it caused the same situation where we were trying to combat the issue, and instead it's just made it worse.
I also think, Maud, just to bring you in, you only started St Mary's this year.
Yes, so I transferred into second year. I was studying a different course in Queen's University and decided I wanted to teach, managed to get a late application, transferred over, and it was a week later that the scheme was introduced, and it felt like a slap across the face, because it was like, if I just waited. And the fact I'm still sitting here, it's a miracle. I just wanted to push through. It got to a point, I just want to be finished with uni. I want to get out and teach. That's where I want to be. I love education. But it did feel like, why am I here? I could just walk out, wait another year and come back. But there is already this humongous shortage, like, in teachers. We've all just wrapped up our placements. I know the department I was in was struggling. It was at its bare bones in terms of math. And we're seeing then there's this gap, because there was girls transferred in with me also into second year. One of them left because she seen this scheme introduced and went, I'm not going to sit here and pay money if I can wait 8 months, reapply and come back and get it all paid for. So there is a gap. There is going to continue to be a gap until these students that start in September finally come at the end of it in, what will it be? It's like
2030, and the new transform May is 2029. So purposely you've actually got a year there where there's going to be no new teachers to teach the curriculum. What we also have then is the next 3 years would cost me 15,000, 10,000 for you too. It's the fact of, well, you would be now paying £20,000 for students to try and get them numbers up. We would only be costing 15 and 10,000, so you would actually be saving money by investing in us rather than waiting until the new cohort comes in.
And I think, as Chair, you asked the golden question there earlier, where's the cut-off point? We are appreciative, of course, that there's always going to be people left out on the wrong side of it, those who are recently graduated and processed as teachers. However, as Maud has brought up, Ryan and Ben have all mentioned, student teachers aren't, in my experience of speaking to them, aren't okay or happy to just sit around and be like, oh, well, woe is me. They're taking action to turn around, drop out of the courses, as you mentioned, and they're happy to wait, because for a student teacher, as Ryan's mentioned, the difference between coming out of university up to £30,000-40,000 in debt straight away from the get-go, or having that alleviated completely just for waiting for a year or two, it's night and day. And these students are waking up to that fact. And as soon as this scheme was announced back at the start of the year, we were seeing action being taken from some students straight away, and more students are voicing their concerns at this point, and in my experience of talking to them, those numbers are just going to gradually go up and up and up.
Thanks for that. And there's a proposal there from the Deputy Chair. I've no doubt the committee will support
Thank you very much.
writing to the Minister on that basis. David, you'd indicated.
Yeah, I mean, it's probably some degree been covered now because we've talked quite a lot about the cut-off point, and that was, I mean, I'm of generation having left university with similarly between 30 and 40,000 pounds worth of debt, having entered university, I think 2008, about 2 years after they brought in variable university or tuition fees. I think the only time that I've walked in an Irish Congress Trade Unions march was at Queen's against the Brown Report to increase fees. So I have some sympathy with all of this. I guess my question was going to be around, has been covered now, the cut-off point, because you will have a lot of people probably in a similar circumstance where they've left, and it's what I listened to your proposal and have no problem with Pat's proposal that the Minister could sit down and hear you out. But I think it's always, particularly in a situation where the resource the department has is so limited, and the resource the executive has is so limited, that part of the thing that can stop you doing something that is a good intervention now is what will it cost if you're going to do it, you know, with the added extras or for. So I think that's all going to be part of the consideration. So I think it's a good intervention, but I understand why it feels particularly unfair to yourselves, and I think that's probably worth meeting.
I just want to make one point about when you said about funding. Last week or 2 weeks ago, the Department for Education announced 10.7 million for AI licenses. It costs 11% to keep us in teaching and to pay for our fees and to secure us for 2 years. There's about 120 of us that are affected by this bursary across the 4 years. That's the equivalent of 240 years of teaching. For what costs the department 11% of their AI proposal and what costs them 0.046% of their annual budget, it seems like something that, you know, compared to what the AI license is at 10.7 million for 1.2 million to secure education and to secure funding for us for later years and for the children of the future, I think is something that we should all.
We've had that, just to say, before you came. I mean, I haven't looked at this in detail, but before you came in today, we had mention of the AI cost and what that can be used for. I have to say, I hope this does not become what we've had with the school pouches and so on. I think the use of AI within our schools is going to be absolutely vital to the future of teaching here, and we should be very careful, I think, of making an issue out of spend on issues that are going to help reduce workload, and they are just, they're going to be necessary tools for teaching and teaching our kids for the future. I really hope the AI licenses thing does not become a point of contention for that, because I really think more than any other thing, and I take there's other issues that we could point to here, AI licenses, without me drilling into it personally, the ability to use AI efficiently within our schools, I think, is going to be a really, really important thing. I just want to state that. I know it's not, you're just drawing examples.
I completely, sorry.
I would completely agree with that. I don't think Ben is for a second necessarily saying that isn't the case. Yeah. However, as he mentioned, in St Mary's alone, 260 years worth of trained teachers.
I accept the point he's trying to make. There's other examples I would probably draw on rather than.
And I completely agree. The reason I brought in the AI was A, it was recent, and B, AI is readily available. Unlike teachers, readily available. Us teachers aren't readily available. That's why you've introduced the scheme. And I know there's a hell of a lot of issues with AI, and that's something that, you know, we all have to look at. However,
I guess from government point of view and of the restrictions around that, you can't really be advising teachers, whilst they may do it, to just go on ChatGPT and use it in that way. You have to have those licenses.
The issue is that teachers are probably going to do it anyway.
I think we're going down a rabbit hole here.
I was going to suggest of going down a rabbit hole into AI.
I mean, I think it can be summed up like, just as simply as AI, like, you're 100% right. We're going to a future where we're not going to be able to deal without it. I don't like AI. I wouldn't use it in my classroom. I understand that a lot of teachers are using it. It helps reduce workload 100%. So I understand investing in that. But you can't have AI in the classroom without teachers. You will never be able to replace teachers with AI.
Definitely.
So I don't think it's like, as Ben has put forward, like, if we're going to invest in AI, we're sat here.
I suspect it was a passing comment from
Yeah,
Ben.
turned into something else completely.
Then core to your proposal. So
Yeah.
I think we can move on. I do suspect that AI may fund everything in the education system from here on in, based on the minister's announcement. Cara,
Thank you so much, Chair. Thank you so much for being here. You've put across your case so well and such an articulate way. I think with the cost of living crisis, it's been really well communicated. Things are going up and up. I know when I was at uni, it was hard to survive, but I know here now it's even worse with inflation. Do you feel strongly then that this is essentially a two-tier system?
I feel it's a two-tier system come September, yes, whenever the students that we have classes will be with first years and second years preparing for school experience, and we sit in the same classroom and there's two different and people are training for the same degree, one's paying for it and one's getting it paid for them. I just don't think it's fair in that the new students coming in will have the financial issues that we have as current students, but we have an additional barrier because we are paying the tuition fees and our student loans are going up, but we're not seeing the benefit of that. We're not getting that money that's going straight to the university. Whether it's any money that new students will be looking from the student loan company is going straight into their bank account to help them with the cost of living, whereas we aren't getting all that. We're having to be charged for that.
Can I just also say that when we graduate, there will be 2 years for at least me, and then for you, there'll be 3 years of PGCE groups for our subjects that would have had £1,000 a month plus their tuition fee paid for. So when we're applying for the jobs, we're at a disadvantage financially compared to them. And when I was applying for uni, like I went straight from school to university, but I was going to go to Queen's, do an undergrad and then a PGCE. So if I went through that path, then I would have been one of the people getting the PGCE bursary. So why would I be a disadvantage for taking the path that went straight into teaching, because that's what I knew my end goal was.
And that's what the education minister's putting money and frameworks in for, is for ITEs, and then he's
irony, I think.
Yes.
This is meant to incentivise young people like yourself getting into this profession, and then actually what it's doing is facilitating the brain drain, and you're put between a rock and a hard place. You want to stay here and develop and be part of your community and give back, but you're actually stuck. It seems so grossly unfair.
Also, we love St Mary's, everybody here loves St Mary's, but as we says, we do have financial issues, everybody does. If we can go to a different university and get financial help, that is something that some of us will unfortunately have to look at, which is not something we want to do. We all applied to St Mary's because we wanted to go to St Mary's. It's just now that because this has come in, it's obviously an incentive for new students, but for us, we are new students over PGCE, and now it's an incentive for us to leave.
So I am going to come in at this stage. I think I would appreciate your time on this, and unfortunately it is just arriving in a session where we've a very big agenda just in the interest of time, but I think we have that clear proposal from the Deputy Chair in terms of writing to the Minister around seeking either ministerial or senior official engagement to meet with you directly to discuss your proposals. I think that the time and the effort and the engagement that you've shown on the issue, I think, warrants that from the department. So if members are all agreed in terms of the Deputy Chair's proposal. All agreed? Okay. I will have to draw a line under it there, but really do appreciate your time, and wish you all the very best of luck with your careers in the future in teaching.
Thank you very much for your time, folks.
Thank you. Okay, members, so I think that's the only action arising from that briefing, and we have agreement on that. And sorry, Michelle.
They mentioned people dropping out because of this. Could be worth asking to see what the dropout rates are.
Oh, good idea.
Yeah, no, I think we could certainly include that in our correspondence to seek.
Are we going to do we're not going to get into discussion, but it's not unreasonable. People want to scrutinise that, and we're not going to try and make an issue out of it here today. But that money's going to Google and Microsoft. Do you know what I mean? It's a rich companies getting 10.7 million from education at this time. People are allowed to ask questions about that and be sceptical, and the department can say it's not okay, but
just give David a really brief reply. I really don't. The meeting time doesn't.
People absolutely should scrutinise, and I said I haven't drilled into this myself, so I mean we should all want to scrutinise that, absolutely. I just think, and it's not to take away, it's just first example I can think of, with the phone pouches, it's the thing that comes out quite often to say, oh, we could be using this money to fund that. I mean, I genuinely think whoever's going to, and in terms of AI, I think this is something that we're going to have in our education system, should have in our education system, whoever's in charge of it, and we should be careful about demonising AI in its entirety.
Perhaps an evidence session for another time. So, item 8 on the agenda, then, members, is the childcare, an oral briefing from the Department of Education on the early learning and childcare strategy. So, if witnesses want to make their way forward, I'd refer you to the clerk's briefing note at page 106 and the department's briefing paper provided at page 108 of your packs. So, very happy to welcome from the department today Tina Dempster, Acting Director of Early Years Childcare and Children and Young People Strategy, Linda Drysdale, Head of Early Years Intervention Programmes Team, and Christine Leacock, Head of Preschool Education Programme Team, so all from the Department of Education. So you're very welcome here today, and thank you for your time. I think really there's probably no need for preamble. We will hand over to you for any initial presentation or opening remarks, up to 10 minutes, and we'll move to question and answer from there. Okay, thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Chair, for the invitation to come and speak to you today to provide an update on the draft Early Learning and Childcare Strategy. As you've said, I'm joined by Christine Leacock, who's Head of the Preschool, and Linda Drysdale, who's Head of the Early Years Targeted Intervention Programmes. So, as you'll be aware, Minister Given provided a written ministerial statement to the Assembly on the 17th of December 2025, following the launch of the draft Early Learning and Childcare Strategy. The Minister stated that the strategy is ambitious but realistic, and if agreed and funded by the Executive, the key actions would be to subsidise over 50% of childcare costs by working families by April 2032, provide universal full-time preschool education for target-age children, strongly position Northern Ireland amongst the leading international models of support, introduce an early years curriculum framework to promote consistent content and pedagogy across early years and childcare providers, expand developmental provision to all 2 to 3 year olds, stabilise funding for existing early years programmes targeting children facing disadvantage and expand them in line with evidence need, fund specific initiatives for children with special educational needs and/or disabilities, and develop a plan to strengthen the childcare workforce. The strategy was launched for a 14-week consultation which closed on the 24th of March. In addition to the consultation survey and a quality impact assessment, rural needs impact assessment and a children's rights impact assessment were provided. An easy read version of the strategy was also made available. 469 responses have been received from both individuals and organisations, and the full analysis of the consultation responses is currently underway. We are delighted to have received so many responses during the consultation, and we want to take the time to carefully consider these. We are prioritising this work, but it will take time to complete a thorough analysis, particularly as we received a number of lengthy written submissions, as well as the completion of the online survey. I would, however, if I may, provide an overview of the consultation process and some initial analysis, with the caveat that this will not be the complete picture until all responses have been fully analysed. The consultation events took the form of both online and in-person events. Most of these took place in the evenings to facilitate parents and childcare practitioners, with in-person sessions held in Belfast, Londonderry and Enniskillen. In addition, DE officials undertook comprehensive engagement with sector representatives, including the Northern Ireland Childminder Association, the Early Years Organisation, Altram and the Education Authority's Preschool Education Group. Sessions were held with the Day Board to take on board the views of the school age sector and children in Northern Ireland to explore the proposals and impact of the lives of children and young people. The Early Years Organisation conducted engagement with young children on our behalf to make sure the voice of the child was heard. A consultation event was also held for the preschool sector and another for the Early Learning and Childcare Stakeholder Engagement Forum, which is made up of some 50 representative key organisations and bodies with an interest in early learning and childcare. There was a particularly high turnout for the online events, with some having in the region of 80 participants registered, and this included childminders and the preschool providers. The in-person events, which tended to be small in number, also had great value as it allowed us to have deeper conversations with those parents, providers and stakeholders who were motivated to take the time out of their day to come and share their views and experiences with us. The consultation sought views on the draft strategy's objectives and actions under the 3 themes of supporting children in their early years, supporting families and carers with their children's learning and childcare costs, and supporting the early years sector and workforce. The consultation survey was held in Citizen Space online platform, and a total of 413 responses were received in that format. The online survey allowed individuals and organisations to give their views on the 3 themes and 9 strategic objectives and associated impact assessments. It provided a coherent way for respondents to submit their views on the level of agreement of each thematic objective, from strongly agree to strongly disagree. Comment boxes under each theme allowed respondents to qualify their responses or provide further information should they wish. The level of engagement within the draft Early Learning and Childcare Strategy consultation has been positive and has enabled us to hear a broad range of views. Whilst it is too early to give a full analysis of the responses received, initial analysis shows that the strategy has been well received, in particular the standardisation of the preschool education programme, the proposed increase in the Northern Ireland Childcare Subsidy Scheme, and the focus on children facing disadvantage, including those with special educational needs and disabilities. The measures to support the workforce have also received positive feedback, with respondents overwhelmingly either agreeing or strongly agreeing that skilled, valued and properly supported workforce is fundamental to delivering high quality early learning and childcare. Clear career pathways, CPD opportunities, SEND training and payment of the real living wage are all critical steps in progressing and professionalising the sector and improving recruitment and retention. When considering the extent to which respondents have agreed or disagreed with a particular objective or action, it is important that we consider the reason why they have done so. We are seeing that in many cases where a respondent has indicated that they disagree, it has not been the objective or action that they have disagreed with in principle, but rather the plans for implementation and principally the timescale for delivery. This distinction is important when considering the analysis and determining what respondents are actually telling us. There were some areas where respondents have told us either during the consultation meetings or in their responses that they wished for us to clarify the roles of certain sectors, such as the role of the school-age childcare sector in the strategy, and the need to emphasise that the preschool education programme is a distinct educational programme, not to be confused with more general childcare provision. Whilst both are important and interlinked, we recognise that early education and childcare should be given separate recognition within the document, and we will seek to draw this out in the revised strategy. Further refinement is also being considered in other areas within the final strategy as a result of the consultation, including addressing the risks that excessive childcare provider fee increases impact the benefits of the subsidy scheme in supporting parents. A draft implementation plan for the delivery of the priority actions will accompany the final strategy. However, it remains that the scale and pace of implementation of the final strategy will be impacted by the very challenging budget context being faced. To put that in perspective, 55 million executive funding for early learning and childcare was provided in 25-26. The Finance Minister has proposed an indicative budget of 55 million in 26-27, 65 million in 27-28 and 75 million in 28-29 for the ELC strategy, totalling 195 million. This falls short of the projected costs of 300 million that we have identified over the next 3 financial years and submitted to the Department of Finance initially. Put simply, providing the same funding as 25-26 fails to take account of the rising costs of continuing to implement the early measures funded in 24-25 and 25-26 and does not support, for example, the continuing rollout of the standardisation of preschool vision. Static funding will not sustain the 2 cohorts already progressed and enable the transition of the next cohort of preschool provision. In addition, the 55 million budget in 25-26 only covered 7 months of the expanded Northern Ireland Childcare Subsidy Scheme from September 25 to March 26. Full year funding is required in 26-27, as well as additional funding to deliver on the proposed increase to the subsidy scheme. Work to cost the full range of actions identified as Category 2, that is those to be prioritised next and delivered over the 3 years, April 26 to March 2030, in the draft strategy has indicated that 500 million will be required over the next 4-year period. The Education Minister wrote to executive colleagues to highlight the consequences of failing to increase the ring-fenced budget for ELC that is currently included in the draft budget. So in terms of next steps, we plan to publish the consultation analysis when completed. This will be used to inform the final version of the strategy for Ministers' consideration and submission to executive colleagues for agreement, along with, hopefully, the final budget settlement. The Education Minister is committed to bringing forward the final strategy to the Executive as soon as practical. Thank you, Chair. So I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Tina. I imagine other members may focus on the child care aspect of it and that subsidy scheme. So I might just begin with issues around early years and preschool in particular. In terms of and I think it had been in the strategy, it had been mentioned that there was a need for a 2 to 3, an expanded 2 to 3 year old programme. Where does the work sit on that currently?
Okay, yes, there was. So I think the first part of that action is for us to develop a clear picture of what currently exists. So you'll be aware that we have a very strong 2-year-old development programme in the Sure Start. And we have significant numbers in the pathway funding that support that age cohort. And we are working with colleagues in the SEN side who also, as part of their transformation in the SEN, are looking at a 2 to 3 year old programme for children with additional needs. So in addition, we need to work with health colleagues on this as well to understand their full remit. As part of the Healthy Child, Healthy Future, and my understanding is the trusts have 2-year-old development clinics, etc., and with other departments who may also be in this space. So I think it's important that we don't duplicate or undermine the existing provision, and that we don't create an even more complicated environment for parents to work in that for that age cohort. So there needs to be the mapping exercise going on, and that has actually started. Linda is actually taking the lead on that for us at the minute in working with statisticians and looking at the Sure Start and the pathway. And we'll also need to map that out about the implications for 2-year-olds in the preschool programme. Could I pick that up in particular? Because it's raised with me consistently when I engage with preschool providers, particularly in the non-statutory sector, the real frustration of the funding of places for non-target age or penultimate age children who would probably be better placed in a fit-for-purpose, high-quality 2 to 3 year old programme, but we're placing them really into inappropriate settings with older children trying to access a curriculum or an approach to learning that they may not be developmentally ready for, and actually that then has impacts on everybody in that room. The children who are the target age children, it puts extra demands on staffing levels that are required. I don't hear anybody telling me that they think that's a good approach. No. So, I tried to get some answers through from written questions to get a sense of how much we spend on that. And it looks to me for 25-26 we're spending about 5 million on those places. Is there not a simple legislative fix to that we can change the requirement to offer places to those children in statutory settings and reinvest that 5 million into something that's fit for purpose? Yes, no, I would totally agree with you. 2-year-olds should not be in that programme, and it is, and Christine can talk to the legislation behind that. But the standardisation hopefully will also go some way to address some of that issue. That will displace in some of the statutory settings where there was 2-year-olds, which will again feed into that bigger picture of where we look at the 2 to 3 year old programme. I don't know, Christine, if you want to say anything else.
There is an action in the strategy to legislate to remove the requirement on statutory settings to take in non-target age children, penultimate age children. I think that has to be seen in the wider context that Tina's talked about in terms of establishing an alternative, because although it is absolutely not the right age and stage appropriate provision for those children, nonetheless parents want to access something.
Absolutely,
and, that's,
but I think,
and the alternative is that
Yeah.
2 day. So it's just bringing all of that together. But absolutely, you'll get no argument from, I don't think, anybody in the department that they should be in the preschool education programme, and we do require primary legislation to change that, and that will be progressed.
And Christine, you know from some engagement with me locally, I mean, I hear very clearly from those non-statutory preschool providers how frustrated they feel, because, you know, children who they actually think we you know, they often run, you know, really good pre as they call it provision, but parents will go where they get a free place, even if it's totally inappropriate provision.
Absolutely.
So
And
it feels quite perverse. So I suppose I'm just trying to establish, if we're spending, and the trajectory on the spend has gone 3.2 million, 3.3 million, dipped to 2.8 in 23-24, up to 4.3 and now over 5 million. So we're consciously spending money on something that we know is inappropriate provision. So do we have any sense, what could we do with that 5 million to develop an appropriate 2 to 3 year old programme? Surely we could just take that money and reinvest it. And if it needs a law change, They're, you know, we always say there's no money. There's 5 million. Everybody in the room is saying we're spending on the wrong thing.
Yeah.
And I don't, as I say, I don't think you get any disagreement from anybody in the department, and also statutory settings as well, who also don't want those children in their classrooms because it is not age and stage appropriate for them either. There is no disagreement on this. It's a case of getting that legislation through. It would require a primary bill, and we intend to do that.
When would that be delivered, do you think?
I don't have an answer for that at this
stage. Yes, it is something that we need to progress. What we needed to do here is we needed to ensure that we've got the right actions and the right objectives, and that's the purpose of the consultation. The implementation plan, and then in the resources to effect implementation of all of these actions, and the timing of that is what is the next stage of this as part of developing the final strategy.
Just one other question for me, and it is just again in the preschool space, and it is around the SEN Inclusion Fund, because there's not maybe as much emphasis on SEN in the strategy as I'd maybe anticipated, but one intervention at preschool level that the Minister has certainly trailed as being a really, really effective and welcome intervention was that SEN Inclusion Fund, but that's just dropped off a cliff at the end of March, and I know a lot of providers in my area are very frustrated. They didn't even get a letter to sort of bring it to their attention. Now, I know the Minister has come back to me to say it was only ever to be for that financial year, but we know that these settings don't operate on a financial year basis. They had staff in place who they were employing to actually deliver interventions. Have we let our preschool providers down by just ditching that funding at this point in the year?
And I wouldn't say it is ditched, to be fair. It is part of the bid that makes up this increase that we're asking for from the 55 million that's proposed, in order to deliver all additional funding that the ELC strategy has done in the last 2 years. Will require 55 million is just not going to be able to do that, and the SEN Inclusion Fund is included and wrapped up in that piece. We absolutely, that was a pilot scheme. It was well received. We worked very closely with our SEN colleagues on this. And we really want to further that and enhance that and keep that going, because it's you know the feedback coming from it is great, but it is subject.
To be clear, it was positive.
Yeah, it really was, and it is included, and it was included in the bid that we had put forward, which initially required 81 million to the Department of Finance.
I'll just ask one just selfishly very local question. You mentioned standardisation of preschool. Non-statutory providers have repeatedly raised with me that they have real concerns that the standardised model puts them in real financial jeopardy. They have run their numbers and they struggle to see how they will continue to be financially viable, particularly as some of them see that there's a risk they could lose pathway funding when they move into that model. Will the department or officials meet with those local providers who I've put that in writing and sought that meeting, and I have had no response as yet, to actually sit down and work through their figures, because we're told that the department don't accept their figures, that they would like the opportunity to engage with officials on that. Is that something that could be accommodated?
Oh, yes, absolutely. We're happy to engage with any provider at any stage.
I appreciate you agreeing to that, because I think if it's affecting providers in my area, it'll be affecting providers across the board. Okay, I'll bring the Deputy Chair in.
Thanks, Tina. The consultation, are the results of the consultation going to be published?
Yes.
Have you an idea when? Is there a timeline?
there's 469 responses, and we want to make sure we get through these responses. You know, people have took the time to clearly set out their concerns, and we want to really go through every single one of them. That's going to take us, you know, a matter of weeks to do that. And we will intend, I mean, I want to get it out as soon as possible. And, you know, we will be presenting that to the Minister. But, you know, I would hope that it would be this side of the summer in order to do that.
Are there any headline issues that jump out at you that you would like to share with the committee?
Well, I think, just as I'd covered sort of earlier, I think from the preschool sector, there certainly was a feeling that the educational role of the preschool programme wasn't brought out sufficiently well in the draft strategy, so that is certainly something we want to look at. Even the title of the strategy was called into question, that we want to look at as well. Workforce was a huge issue that was raised by, and we knew workforce, and we would acknowledge up front that everything that we try to do in this strategy and every action is underpinned by the workforce. So, you know, that's definitely a headline that came out of it. There was certainly agreement to the 2 to 3 year old programme, to the curriculum framework. There was strong agreement with things along those lines. And, you know, what I would say is, as I said, there was a high percentage of everybody agreeing with the actions and agreeing with the objectives. It was the timing and the prioritisation and how quickly we would bring these things in that seemed to be, you know, the common theme that's running through a lot of this.
And just given that you mentioned workforce there, you'll be aware that the Irish medium sector has increased by 400% over the last 25 years. And I'm just wondering, in terms of a workforce capable of meeting that growth, particularly in early years, what exactly is the department doing?
In terms of Irish medium specifically, what I would say, of the 55 million that we did have last year, between pathway funding, there was an additional 315,000 allocated to the IM projects within the pathway fund, and that brought the total funding up to 472,000 for 18 projects on Irish medium within pathway. We also allocated an additional 45,000 last year to provide support and training to Irish medium preschool settings through Altram.
Just in terms of the workforce, Tina, because I'm sure you'll accept that the Irish medium sector is in a unique position. So, and if we're talking about early intervention, if you have children who are being raised with Irish as their first language, and they, for example, need help with speech and language, I mean, how many speech and language therapists are there who can provide support through the medium of Irish?
Yeah,
or what plans the department have to recruit?
Yeah, and I think this all forms the basis for the workforce plan, and we've already actually had discussions with Irish medium representatives in the workforce plan that does need to be a significant feature within the plan, the workforce plan itself, because of the uniqueness of the difficulties that they're facing. So it will be included in that workforce plan.
And when's that going to be ready?
Well, that's part of the actions that need to be agreed, and then the budget allocated to that. So it's all in the mix of this. We need to move forward with these actions, and the timing of those.
Do you want to give me a timeline?
No, I don't.
Okay, well, moving on to another issue, making childcare affordable has been an executive commitment, and of course the Education Minister has been taking the lead in all of that, and I mean, there have been tens of millions of pounds put into it, yet we're hearing that there has been an increase of 17% since its introduction. Do you accept that many families are going to conclude that this strategy just isn't working?
Yeah, I mean, yes, we did. There was a 9% increase in fees last year, and there has been, on our analysis to date, an 8% increase in fees this year. Now, when we look at that, we're getting that information obviously from the subsidy scheme now, because they're reported directly by providers. When we look at other jurisdictions, when we look at those increases, Wales increases has been 8.9% this year, Scotland's 8.4%. So, there is an increase in fees across all UK jurisdictions. Now, if we look at what we hear in terms of the subsidy scheme, the schemes, providers have always increased their fees on an annual basis for many years. They don't increase their fees because of the subsidy scheme. That has been an ongoing feature. And I think what we need to look at is those parents would have faced the full impact of those increased in fees directly if it wasn't for the subsidy scheme. The subsidy scheme provides the 15% off the total bill. Yes, the increased fees, when you add the 15%, that's less in the pockets of parents that they feel. But ultimately, because of the scheme, they are slightly better off when they are faced with these increased fees, which would have happened anyway. So I think it is a matter of how you look at this subsidy scheme. It is giving that 15% reduction off the actual bill. Yes, the increases are causing some concerns for families because it's still potentially making it unaffordable.
I understand the arithmetic there. The difficulty was that this was hailed as a scheme that was going to make childcare more affordable. And it doesn't really matter whether, parents know anyway, and I know when my kids were, in creche and so on, that, the fees were going up every year anyway. Mm-hmm. So my difficulty with this is that, tens of millions of pounds are being spent on a scheme that was designed to make childcare more affordable. And it's not doing that. Whatever metric you use, it has failed to do whatever the policy intention was.
That's a brief response, and then we'll have to move to the next member.
Yeah, I mean, it has provided 27.5 million of funding that didn't come out of parents' pockets for 28,000 children. Part of the proposals in the strategy is to increase the subsidy rate, which would help make childcare even more affordable. We had plans, hopefully, to raise it to 20% this year and rising up to 50% by 2032, which would meet the objective of trying to make it more affordable. But that is subject to funding being made available from government in order to do that. Fees will increase anyway, and they have to be covered within the system somewhere, either by parents, providers, or government. So if government wants to step in, it has to have the funding in order to do that. Now, an analysis of introducing the capping fee model, which we're aware of in other jurisdictions, would be around 500 million over the next 4 years. Now, that is not possible with the budget that we're dealing with and that's being proposed. So, there is a phased and a staged process here, but I would say that the scheme at the minute, having delivered 27 million that parents didn't have to pay out based on the 15%, is some way to moving towards that complete, more affordability objective that we want to get to.
We'll need to close it there, just in the interest of time. Michelle, you'd indicated next.
Thank you. Thanks, folks. This is a long-awaited strategy. 10 years or so, maybe more in the making. So I certainly got feedback that people were a bit disappointed in the kind of lack of detail, the lack of targets, the lack of detailed plans. They expected a lot when they waited so long. But look, you're going to come back with, that was your consultation, you'll come back with a final plan, and I think we definitely look forward to seeing that. I'm going to pick up on some of the stuff Pat was doing there around affordability, because when you launched this strategy, it was very clearly launched around affordability. Childcare reforms could cut costs for families by over 50% was what was led with. There's a lot in the strategy, but that's where the focus was. I know in my response to the consultation, we looked at the analysis that you used around the subsidy scheme, and we felt it was a bit misleading. So you cite a subsidy rate that you were aiming for in 2032 of 40%, and then you applied today's costings to argue that the scheme compares well to other schemes being offered elsewhere. I know others did this analysis. Melted Parents added analysis of adding 12% to costs, so costs will go up as well as the subsidy rate. And the cost then to the parents could be around 30k a year. So if there's a subsidy rate of 40%, that's a huge amount of money. So I'd love to have a scheme. I'd have no issue paying money on a scheme here that's going to help parents with affordability, but I think it's fair that we ask questions to make sure that it's value for money and that we're content that it's a good use of public funds, the model that we have now. So the objective here is affordability. Is there a risk, though, that this model isn't value for money in the sense that it's public subsidy being paid to private providers with no cost control measures at all? The concern being that public money is being used to subsidise the cost increases within private businesses.
Well, I mean, well, first of all, what we are seeing is an 8% increase in fees, not the 12% that
12%
has been quoted.
was an analysis of projected cost increases, so it was, you're saying 8%, but I think if you look at inflation, the way costs are increasing, and the figures we have, that 17% is the cost increase to fees, I think it's reasonable to find something in the middle there. But look, we're being semantic there about 8 and 12.
Yeah, I mean, obviously the Minister, there's no point in having a scheme if it's not meeting the objective of what it's supposed to do, and the Minister would be the first one and to say that, especially with the use of public money. We all have to be mindful of that. So I think with this type of scheme, you're always taking the percentage off the total bill, and yes, that bill may go up, but you're still taking that percentage off for the parents, so that they're not having to cover that. But we have to be mindful that to cap fees, as seems to be the alternative solution that people want to do that, needs to be borne by somebody, and that requires government funding to do that. So as well as the subsidy to reduce the things, the overall bill, then you would need a subsidy to the provider to stop the fee increases, and that's not easy to do. This is an 80% private market.
Have you looked at other models, though? I mean, that's one way to do it. Have you looked at other ways to do it?
I mean, we have looked, there is other models in UK jurisdictions. There's other models in other countries, in the Scandinavian countries. We've looked internationally at Canada.
They all have some kind of cost controls?
They don't all have cost controls, no. They don't. They are highly government funded with an exceptional amount of money going into them. Some of those other countries, in Scandinavian countries, have extremely high tax, which is we're not operating in. So the government funding, and in this current climate, with what we have, this is what the Minister, he wants to reduce the bills for working parents as part of this scheme. But we're acknowledging that we are in an environment where those fees are increasing, and they are increasing, in fairness to providers, because of the excessive costs they're facing in running the business. So we can't risk the sustainability of the sector while we're trying to do something.
Can you say with confidence that all the cost increases can only be attributed to the increases that they're being experienced in providers? If there's someone who is increasing costs by a higher rate, we've nothing in place to react to that.
And yes, and this is something that we are looking at in terms of the scheme to make sure it is cost effective. So there are a couple of things that will happen here. We're looking at the transparency of fees, which first of all is a significant problem for parents.
Self-regulation. Yeah.
No, but we are looking at, within the parameters of the subsidy scheme, how can we trigger a review where we would see an unacceptably high increase to fees that is out with the average increase of fees across Northern Ireland, and what would that trigger, like a review or further consideration as part of the subsidy scheme. What will also help and support us, I think, in this is the DFE-led childcare provider advisory service that will be able to look at the incomes, the outgoings, where the challenges are really facing these providers that are causing these fee increases, and that can also help inform the policy of where we would go in terms of the parameters of the subsidy scheme as well.
Since you brought up the advisory service, and first of all, before we close off that one, I'm anticipating then in the final strategy there will be some kind of cost control measure that will be.
There will be some sort of, hopefully, and I mean, we'll be discussing this further and working with our delivery partners as well. There will be some sort of review that we will be able to undertake within the parameters of the subsidy scheme.
Business advisory service, the strategy says it's going to be £8 million. Can you tell us more specifically what that £8 million is going to deliver? It's a lot of money. I think the expectation from the sector would there be some kind of direct support to help the sustainability of the sector. A business advisory service, I don't think was what anybody was anticipating or felt that the sector really needed. So what will it deliver that will be beneficial to those providers?
Yeah, if I can just set the context.
Full answer, but as brief as possible.
If I can just set the very quick context of that. The Business Advisory Service came out of a recommendation by a commissioned report led by DFE.
People have criticised it.
Yeah, and it was DFE that ran it and organised and DOF were involved in that as well, consultancy services. DFE have asked for 2 million to take this forward next year. So that 8 million is coming from 4 years of 2 million. It is part of a bigger picture, so we need to understand from the providers. We need to give them that support, and there was a lot in looking at that report that did want an advisory service, a specific advisory service. So that's part of the picture. That needs to feed into the Department of Health, where they do the map of supply and demand across Northern Ireland in specific areas and in specific providers. And that then needs to feed into what support through an accessibility fund, which is also referenced in the strategy, about where we need those providers and where they are at significant risk of closure. Following all of that analysis, then an accessibility fund would need to come into play.
I think it's fair to say, though, a strategy that took 10 years to put together, I think people anticipated that level of detail about where the provision is and where the problems are would have been in that strategy at this stage. But that'll be great when we get it, but it should have been there.
Danny, you'd indicated.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you. So I'm probably going to start in where Michelle started off and Pat a wee bit. One of my constituents actually was in just a number of weeks ago, and they qualified for the 15% subsidy scheme. Their bills are higher than what it was when they started. Now, tell me how that's a success then.
Well, as I said, providers will increase their fees, and they do on an annual basis.
So how do you sell that, though, to say that you put money in people's pockets and you make it affordable when it's more expensive than when it started? Surely that has to be cause for concern.
Yes, it is. It absolutely is. And no one's saying that, everybody is much better off because of this, because of those increases in fees. But what I would say is that if the 15% wasn't there, then your parent would be facing the full increase and cost of the increase.
You don't know that. And I'll tell you why, because no safeguards really went in. You didn't put money in the pockets of parents. What it done, it went into private businesses. So there's no guarantee what that percentage is going up. You put a subsidy scheme in there that has been gobbled up by the private businesses.
No, I don't think that. What we do is we get the invoices for every single child and the hours that they've been in that childcare and the total cost of that. We then pay 15% of that. And that is paid to the provider, and the provider
I understand how it works, but what I'm saying is it's not putting money, it's not affordable. It's not even close to affordable. It's more expensive from when you started. It's more expensive, slightly more expensive from where it started. But this is tens and tens of millions of public money.
Yes.
So that to me, that's a failure in my eyes.
But if the 15% wasn't there, and that fee had increased, that parent would be facing that full fee increase.
Go back to the public and say, look, we've done a really good job here. You're not paying as much as what you could have been if we hadn't brought and put that money into it. So
I think the idea was to support working parents with the affordability of their childcare. This was a step to do that.
But you have to accept that hasn't happened, though, because
I accept that the fees have increased, yes, and potentially from last year to this year, what parents are paying is still slightly higher because fees increased, but they are still getting that 15%.
Millions of money of public money has been pumped into it.
But they are still getting the 15% reduction. If that wasn't there, they would be paying the full bill.
That success. Surely the minister has to take some responsibility here. That's his flagship to say, I'm going to make childcare more affordable. But really it hasn't. It's more expensive from when it started. So surely something else should have happened then. A different scheme, a different model.
Well, I think the fact that 27.5 million has not had to be paid by parents over the year is a success in itself.
I don't see how anyone's going to see that as a success when they're paying more money out of their pocket.
But if we hadn't paid that, parents would have been paying the 27 million.
So could that money not have been used on a different scheme? Then it means the money would have been in the parents' pocket, and it wouldn't have been as expensive.
When
and it
you
would be
say in the
affordable.
parents' pockets, you mean to pay the parents directly?
No, so that they're not paying out as much in childcare, because childcare is not affordable. The whole setup of all this is meant to be to make childcare affordable. It is not affordable now. It's more expensive than when it started. So saying that that 27.5 million, they would have been paying that back on top, that's not what the public needs to hear. That's not what working parents need to hear. They need that support. They need to feel that they have money in their pocket rather than more money going out, because that's what's happening. It's not affordable.
So are you looking at the scheme that it talks about capping fees and stopping those fee increases?
I'm not the one in charge of the scheme. I'm just pointing out that it's being flagged like a success, but to me, when I just look at it, sitting here and listening to the evidence, how can that be a success when it costs more money than what it started? To me, it doesn't. That tells me that there's serious issues with it.
Because of fee increases, it does cost slightly more for parents, but it would cost a lot more
What
for parents
safeguards did
if
you
the
put in to
15%
stop?
wasn't
You just
there.
didn't put any safeguards in.
Yeah.
Then, because it's been gobbled up. The private business has been gobbled
I
up.
wouldn't say it's been gobbled up, because when you take the invoice and the overall bill, we're applying the 15%, regardless, even if that bill has slightly increased between last year and this
I'm
year.
not disputing
There's
that,
still
but
a
what I'm saying
15%
is
increase.
if childcare is not affordable. If you have a scheme that you're saying that you're going to bring forward, and to be fair to the executive, it has said it was a flagship programme, which the minister is in charge of. What I'm saying is I don't think this minister's doing a good job of it, because it's not changing anything. So that's the problem.
Well, I would say 27 million has changed and made an impact for parents across Northern Ireland.
Okay, it's still more expensive when it started, but okay, we'll go around in circles that all day. See, just quickly go to the Sure Start. Sure Start for it makes childcare affordable in many disadvantaged areas. Why was there no costing projections for its expansion within the draft strategy?
Just a brief response to finish this
Yeah,
one.
I mean, we have expanded Sure Start. We've brought in the 22 super output areas in the last couple of years. There's now an outreach model. Additional funding was paid to Sure Start in order to deliver that.
Is there cost of projections though in the strategy?
Yes, there's additional funding that is required from this year and onwards to maintain what we've already done. We are also looking at scoping about if we expand even more through that outreach model, we are getting costings and analysis of what that might look like. But I would caveat this that this also has to be done in line with the workforce plan and the workforce strategy, because we need to be sure that the system and the Sure Start projects can cope with any further expansion as we move this forward.
Thank you.
Thank you, Danny. David, you indicated?
Thank you, Chair, and I think our Sinn Féin colleagues are trying to straddle the line of trying now to disparage a scheme that they all cheered just a year ago. Indeed, a year ago, Keith Archibald was posting on Facebook about the cuts that were going to be made to the benefit of primary school age children, and saying that evidence that these things were a priority for Sinn Féin. We turned to your paper today, and as you've outlined, the Sinn Féin-led Finance Department are underfunding the scheme against the next 3 financial years. Can I ask, taking all that into account and the work that you do with the sector, has there been any concerns expressed by the sector to yourselves around what Keith Archibald's so-called Good Jobs Bill would do to prices for parents using childcare?
Not directly. Anybody has raised anything directly with me specifically in terms of the Good Jobs Bill, but it is raised with me on a regular basis, the cost of delivering childcare and the implications through minimum wage increases, through inflation, and through the costs just of running the energy, the heating, the insurance premiums, all of those things, and what they have to do. Staffing is a huge problem, and what they have to deliver. So yes, those concerns are being raised on a regular basis by providers with me in terms of running the cost of the business.
Comes on top of the sort of national insurance
Yep.
rises and so on from Westminster in that regard, and that, as you can imagine, will only lead to these higher prices. So, I mean, I think all those things that you've said to us, I think we can see why prices are rising across the globe on just about everything. So that's going to apply to our childcare providers as well. So it's no surprised that those costs are going up. We don't want to see that. We want to see them maintained and lowered for parents, but ultimately we need to judge what effect the scheme is having against the prices that would otherwise be being paid, not against what prices were paid previously. I think that makes sense, but I think most of the other questions that have drawn out some of the detail, I don't think have much further to go in that, but thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you, David and Cara.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you so much. Most of my questions have actually been answered. Just lastly, one on rural access and equality implications. So I have a very rural constituency in East Derry. Have you identified any specific challenges for rural childcare provision? And are rural providers, in your experience, more likely to be affected by workforce constraints?
Yeah, I mean, reality is a big issue when we look at accessibility for childcare. And it is a specific focus. You know, we have looked at the rural impact assessment on anything that we will do, and anything more that we introduce in terms of actions. Yes, the rural provision in terms of access for childcare can be very difficult. And we are trying to fund even an increase, and we have funded in the last 2 years an increase in childminders, for example, to bring more of them into the workforce, working with the Department for Communities and their childmind academies, in the hope to expand and support rural areas for children, and more flexible access to childcare provision. But yes, it is a specific focus, and it will need to be included and will be included as part of the workforce plan.
It's good to know, because you do hear stories of some parents having to travel sometimes 10 to 15 miles one way, and then they have to go the other way to go back to work. So I welcome that, and thank you for being here. Thanks.
Thank you, Cara. So thank you for your evidence today, sir. Michelle, were you wanting to come in? It will be very brief. It's probably no time for more questions. Or if there are actions arising at the end, we can come to those. So
we're not even here. Just 15 minutes worth of questions.
We hope to get more questions.
We will need to bring the evidence session to a close. So thank you for your time, and the committee will have a consideration of any actions arising. But I think when we see the detail emerging from the strategy, I think that's come through in the evidence today. We will be obviously wanting to hear from you again in relation to that. So thank you. Okay. So just as the witnesses are making their way out, are there any actions arising from that in terms of any specific points we want to take up with the department? Anything at this stage? Michelle, did you have something that you wanted to add?
It's just stuff that didn't get raised, and I was hoping the workforce.
Yeah, no, I understand. It's just time with we've got the full item with the clause by clause consideration still to go. Okay, so we'll bring that item to a close, and I think I'm going to suggest a short comfort break, and then we will move on to the item 9, which is the clause by clause consideration of the General Teaching Council bill. Thank you. So if we maybe turn off the live feed.
Committee Room 29. Sound. 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 Committee Room 29, 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 Sound.
Okay, so that's us back into public session of the committee. Now, we're now moving on to item 9 on the agenda, which is the formal clause-by-clause consideration of the General Teaching Council bill. However, I am just going to propose that we have a short closed session briefing, as we have the bill office here, who will just be taking us through their response to the department's reply in relation to the proposed amendments that were submitted to them. So if members are agreed for that brief closed session discussion before we move into formal clause by clause, if we're all agreed? Agreed.
Committee Room 29, Sound. 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 Committee Room 29.
Okay, so that is us back into public session. So we had a discussion around with the Bill Office in relation to the Department's response on the two proposed amendments to clauses 2 and 9, and it was agreed at this stage that the committee was not minded to bring those amendments forward at this stage of the process. We also agreed to share a letter received from NASUWT with the Department. Appreciate we will be moving through formal clause by clause consideration, but members agreed that it would still be good for the further stages of this process for committee members to be informed as to the Department's views on the content of that letter. So that we'll start to move through the clause by clause consideration now. So just a couple of things to go through. So informal deliberation has sought to ascertain whether there are any issues members would like to raise, whether they are satisfied with any explanation response, whether there are any proposals for amendments, and then whether members are happy to move on at that stage. So are we now content to move to formal clause by clause decision making on this bill? We're content.
Okay. The officials are available if anybody has any last minute query.
Just think that there is
everybody
anything
okay?
through
All right,
at this stage.
so
Yeah.
you can, and GTC, you can stand down.
Fine, yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, so the committee will now formally determine and set out its position on each clause, and the committee will divide if necessary, and all decisions today will be final in terms of what is reflected in the committee report. That's notwithstanding any further amendments that members may wish to take forward at consideration stage after this stage closes. Okay, I should remind members also that if the committee is not content with a particular clause, the committee can register its formal opposition to the question that the clause stand part of the bill, and that would ensure that the clause is debated at consideration stage. It is anticipated the committee will conclude all formal deliberations at today's meeting, and that the committee will agree its report then at a future meeting, hopefully next week. That would be the intention. So I now move through each clause of the bill. So clause 1, no amendments have been proposed to this clause through the committee process. So can I ask members, is the committee content with clause 1 as drafted?
Could I make a comment just?
Yes.
I've already mentioned in closed session that I intend bringing forward an amendment which has the intention of ensuring that half the members of the committee are elected from registered teachers. And the reason I'm bringing that forward is because we have received a letter from Brenton Morgan and NASUWT which refutes the allegations that teachers were responsible for the dysfunctionality and chaos within the organisation, and he outlines, at least 12 or 15 or 13 reasons to show why it wasn't teachers were responsibility for the problems in there. So I just wanted to put that on the record. I'm happy for clause 1 to go ahead as is, but I intend bringing forward an amendment at consideration stage. It has already been tabled, in fact.
Thank you, Deputy Chair. I'm content with clause as drafted, subject to further debate at consideration stage. All other members content? Content. Clause 2. One amendment was proposed to this clause, but it has been agreed today that there's no plan to formally go forward with that amendment. So on that basis, is the committee content with clause 2 as drafted? Content. Clause 3. No amendments have been proposed to this clause. Can I seek agreement from members that the committee is content with clause 3 as drafted? Clause 4. No amendments have been proposed to this clause. Is the committee content with clause 4 as drafted? Clause 5. No amendments have been proposed to this clause. Is the committee content with clause 5 as drafted? Clause 6. No amendments have been proposed to this clause. Is the committee content with clause 6 as drafted? Clause 7. No amendments have been proposed to this clause. Is the committee content with clause 7 as drafted? Clause 8. No amendments have been proposed to this clause. Is the committee content with clause 8 as drafted? Content. Clause 9. One amendment was proposed to this clause, but it was agreed that no member was going to bring that forward at this stage of the process. So on that basis, is the committee content with clause 9 as drafted? Content. Clause 10. No amendments have been proposed to this clause. Is the committee content with clause 10 as drafted? Content. Clause 11. No amendments have been proposed to this clause. Is the committee content with Clause 11 as drafted? Content. Clause 12. No amendments have been proposed to this clause. Is the committee content with Clause 12 as drafted? Clause 13. No amendments proposed to this clause. Is the committee content with Clause 13 as drafted? Content. Clause 14. No amendments have been proposed to this clause. Is the committee content with Clause 14 as drafted? Content. Clause 15. No amendments have been proposed to this clause. Is the committee content with Clause 15 as drafted? Content. And Clause 16. No amendments have been proposed to this clause. Is the committee content with Clause 16 as drafted? Content. Then the question is also that is the committee content with the short title of the bill? Content. And is the committee content with the long title of the bill? Content. Okay, so that concludes the formal clause by clause consideration of the GTC NI bill. Clark, can you maybe just talk us through the next steps in the process, which I assume is really report writing for agreement?
Yeah, report writing will. So the report will bring together all of the evidence that you've heard, and the Hansards, the research for the bill, the correspondence on the bill, and a record of the decision making that was made here today. So you have a chance to look at it yesterday, and look back and reflect that is exactly what happened. And yeah, correct anything that you want to be given a particular emphasis in the report, and reflect the nuance of the various perspectives that you've heard. So then that would go as a snapshot, as the Chair said, of the committee's position on the bill, and inform the amending stages in the House, which will be scheduled once this is completed. So there is a minimum gap of 5 days between stages, and normally there'd be a bit more time than that to allow the rest of the members of the Assembly to read up on what you've considered, and then it's obviously open for other members to put down amendments if they wish, and all of that to go into the mix for debate in plenary.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, so that brings that item to a close and brings us on to item 10 on the agenda, and it is the SL1, which is the Education School Development Plans Regulations Northern Ireland 2026. So I would refer members to the Clerk's briefing note at page 116, the SL1, which is at page 118, and the explanatory memorandum at page 125, and the draft statutory rule at page 128. So just to provide the necessary background to this, the purpose of the Education School Development Plans Regulations Northern Ireland 2026 is to modernise and simplify how grant-aided schools plan for improvement. The rule is subject to draft negative resolution and is due to come into operation on the 1st of August 2026. The committee considered the SL1 at its meeting on the 22nd of April and agreed to publish the department's papers and issue a call for views using Citizen Space. The call for views closed on the 6th of May 2026 and no responses were received. So I am just going to open up briefly to members for their views on the proposed statutory rule, and if there is any interest or desire in seeking further information from the department at this stage. No? Okay, so if all are content then, the question is if the committee is content that the department proceed with the statutory rule. Is that agreed?
Agreed.
Agreed. Thank you, members. Then that takes us on to item 11, which is correspondence. So pages 133 to 291 of your packs, and page 93 then of tabled papers. So there is a summary note at page 133. So as is normal practice, we'll go through the correspondence. I'll highlight anything that requires committee decision or discussion. Otherwise, it'll be as per the summary note and the directions there. So item 11.4 on page 170. It's a response from the Minister of Health on the provision of nursing cover for special school summer schemes. So happy to open this one up for views. My initial reaction to this would be that it really does to me highlight the ongoing confusion, as far as I can see it, between the EA, Department of Education and Department of Health positions on the operation of summer schemes. It seems from the response that the Department of Health, and some of this reflects information I've heard from special school principals as well, that the safety concerns were actually about other issues beyond nursing. I do feel that if there are still other safety issues in terms of the running of summer schemes in special schools, which is what I'm hearing from special school principals, that the committee should understand this. And I would want to suggest that we really do need clarity on the issues around what are the life safety issues that are still being managed, the status of any planning to mitigate those safety issues, and what engagement with principals we have around the delivery and the legal liability for these schemes. Now, I think we have had a bit of correspondence back and forward from committee on this, so I just want to check maybe through the clerk we wouldn't be duplicating anything, but maybe also to get a sense from members if they would be in agreement that there do seem to be concerns outstanding around this issue.
I would need to come
We
back
need to go back and check, so we can cover that. Yeah.
Just to make sure
that would be
where we are
helpful.
with it, if that's okay.
But are we content that there is a need to seek some clarity around this? Because obviously the summer is fast approaching, and I think certainly the feedback I'm hearing from special school principals is that they continue to have concerns around the safety of these schemes. So we're agreed. Item 11.5, page 172, it's its invitation to the launch of the Children in Northern Ireland report left out disabled children's rights and experiences in NI. Can I propose we note for diaries? Item 11.8, page 182, is correspondence from the Committee for the Economy seeking views on the Petroleum Exploration and Licensing Repeal Bill. Are members content to send a nil response from committee? Is that agreed?
Agreed.
Item 11.9, page 184, is correspondence from the Committee for the Economy seeking views on the Utility Regulator Support for Decarbonisation Preparation Bill. Are members content to send a nil response on this? Agreed. Item 11.11, page 186, is correspondence from the Committee for Justice seeking the committee's view on an SL1 for the SEN and Disability Tribunal Amendment Regulations. So I spoke with the clerk about this. There is an anticipation, I think, from the committee that they would be receiving a response within the next day or so. So I think we have sought an extension on that to maybe just pick up at next week's meeting, as it does actually link in directly to the SEN regs we were discussing today.
It
Do you
does.
want to speak to that?
So we have 45 questions with the SEN team in DE already, and they're coming to speak to those next week about the SEN regs that we're looking at. But in the Justice Committee's process, the issues that have been raised by consultees were for DE to consider, and DOJ has flagged those to DE. So there's a list of those, and I'm just going to check where they overlap with what we've already asked for, and hopefully we can then write back and clarify some of that.
So are we content that's picked up at next week's meeting then, if members are agreed? Great. Item 11.12, page 215, it's a response from the Department of Finance on ring fencing of funding for the Education Holiday Meal Payments Bill. Can I suggest that we add that to the bill folder as evidence for the Holiday Hunger Bill? Are we agreed?
Yes, sure. I would just say that this is evidence that whilst the Holiday Meal Payments Bill is clearly a priority for some members of Sinn Féin, it's not enough to be a priority for their ministers to allocate extra finance to it.
Can we go a wee point there?
I'll give Danny the right to reply there.
Yeah. It should be a priority for all of us. We want to end child poverty, and I should point out that you had a former DUP minister who championed this and said, in fact, education should be playing its part in Children on Holiday. That's on the record from the DUP minister. And just an point when it comes to funding. Let's not pretend that the minister isn't funding other things. Like, we got a correspondence back this week from him around Transform Ed, and that's going to have no impact on services. So that's what annoys me when I hear officials saying something else can be harmful, but their priorities aren't harmful. So we'll have to be fair in it as well. So I think we should be keeping on working together on this here instead of we small digs at it, because the reality of it is it's 90,000 children who go hungry during holiday periods. This is the very least we should be doing, the very, very least, because it's nowhere near enough.
There's not going to be a meeting of minds between David and Danny
Have
on
other
this,
opportunities,
but
sure.
both had the opportunity to put that on the record. So item, but other than that, we are agreed to add that to the bill papers. Yeah. Item 11.13, page 216. It's a response from the Minister of Education regarding funding for Tiny Life charity. The Minister indicates he is not in a position to provide long-term funding certainty for the charity, and that any decision regarding future funding will be considered in the context of DE's 26-27 budget allocation. The allocation of earmarked funding from the Early Learning Childcare Strategy and wider financial pressures. Look, it is a disappointing response, and I've engaged extensively with Tiny Life, and the charity really is being placed in an incredibly difficult position as a result of the financial uncertainty. I think at this stage, really all we can propose, I think, is sharing that correspondence with the charity, but certainly to invite feedback. But I really do have every sympathy with the very difficult position they've been placed in. So if we're agreed, other than any further contributions on that, agreed. Item 11.14, page 217, it's correspondence from an individual regarding the prosecution of parents of SEND pupils for alleged non-attendance at school and concerns about pupil registration. I think there is some reference potentially to an individual case, but there are wider policy issues contained there, so quite extensive detail actually in the correspondence. So our members contend on that basis to write to the Education Authority regarding those concerns raised. Agreed. Item 11.15, page 233, is correspondence from the Minister of Education providing a copy of the draft Education Inspections Bill and the explanatory and financial memorandum. So I think the Minister had indicated that until introduced that the content of that should be viewed as confidential, so I would propose we note for now if members are agreed, but it's useful to note that is coming soon. Item 11.19, page 265, 11.22, page 274, and item 11.24 on page 289. They're all responses to the committee's call for evidence on the Special Educational Needs SEN Regulations Northern Ireland 2026 from SENAC, RNIB and the Northern Ireland Commissioner for Children and Young People. So I'd want to suggest first of all that we add those to the papers for consideration of the SL1, if that's agreed. I would note in particular the SENAC contribution is quite detailed, so members may want to familiarise themselves with that before next week's evidence session. And I did also just want to highlight from the Children's Commissioner that they were quite direct in their correspondence that due to budgetary pressures they simply don't have the resources to respond to this. I think they'll possibly speak to the complexity of the regulations and the time it would have taken to put a response through, but I do think it's important putting that on record. I think it is concerning that the Commissioner's Office should be under that level of budgetary pressure. Item 11.23, page 287, it's correspondence from Shimna Integrated College regarding concerns regarding the oversight and outcome of the independent report into governance at the school. So again, happy to open up for members' views, but I would want to suggest, without getting into too much detail of sort of matters pertaining to sort of governance in an individual school, I would propose that we do share the correspondence with NICE and the department, and I think Shimna College's the initial ask really seems to be can they secure a meeting with NICE and or the department to allow them to discuss the content of that report, which the concerns they've highlighted are that it was very heavily redacted. So I'd propose that we could certainly share that correspondence unless members have any other views.
Agreed.
Are we agreed? Agreed. Item 11.25, page 291, is correspondence from SIA providing a briefing paper on learning life-saving skills. Are members content to share this with the British Heart Foundation? Is that agreed? Agreed. Item 11.26, page 93 of tabled papers. It's an invitation from Live Music Now to an event on expanding access to music for autistic learners in Northern Ireland. Can I suggest we note for diaries? We're agreed? Agreed. Other than that, are we content to dispose of the correspondence as per the summary note at page 133? Are we agreed? Agreed. Item 12, Forward Work Programme, which is in your packs at page 297. Do you want to speak to this at all in terms of any changes or additions, or is it just taking its own course?
Mark was saying that NICT have confirmed to come to speak about SENREGs. Is that right, Mark? Yeah, so that's great. That's in the programme now. And the other thing was just that in terms of Pat's bill, Corleone Gael Scully offered to give the committee a tour of a range of Irish medium schools. So I suppose it's just a matter for the committee, whether you have capacity for that just now.
Look, happy to hear from other members. My sense would be that in terms of the workload pressures of the committee, that may not be deliverable at this stage, but happy to hear from other members. Hughes, Deputy Chair.
I tend to agree with you, Chair. We're under a lot of pressure at the minute. Perhaps we could look at it again at some other time.
Potentially one to pick up after recess, and we'll see what workload looks like at that stage.
Yeah, I think initially, like, the committee did want to go to visit one school in every sector, and it just hasn't been feasible, unfortunately. But I'll feed back.
Yeah, no problem. Okay, thanks for that. So our members content to endorse the forward work programme as currently drafted. We agreed. Right. Item 13 is any other business. Is there any other business?
Yes, I wanted to come in to make the declaration of interest. I know AI was mentioned earlier, and I sit on an AI ethics board. Sorry, I repeat it all the time, but it's important.
Apologies, Cara. You had tried to come in earlier on that, and I
completely
forgot to bring you in. So that's noted.
Just say Julie had to leave during the meeting because one of the children were sick. So just no
problem. We can note that as well. Item 14, date, time and place of next meeting. So that is scheduled for Wednesday the 20th of May at 2 p.m, room 29 and online. And that just leaves me to put the question that the committee meeting does now adjourn. Are we agreed? Agreed.
Committee room 29. Sound.